Chapter 3730. Immediately, a scholarly cultivator in a brocade robe appeared in the inscription with an imperial weapon in his hand. The scholarly cultivator was burly and dignified, and the thick eyebrows on his face were eye-catching. The scholarly cultivator stood in the air and looked at the cave where Fairy Su Ming and Fairy Xiang Feng flew into with interest. He muttered to himself, "Dao sects have always had internal strife since ancient times. This saying is really true. If I go to find Xiao Hua by myself, I can only go to the Black Wind Ridge to touch the impregnable array. Fortunately, I was smart enough to think of starting from the Dao sect's cultivators. This Xiao Hua is really a troublemaker. Not only did he kill Fairy Su Ming's lover, but he also killed Fairy Xiang Feng's lover. Testa. Then again, if not, how could I follow Fairy Su Ming to this place? I have also heard about Song Longzi's cave mansion. There seems to be some Dao sect's mystic arts inside. Since I am here, I will take the opportunity to see if I can get Song Longzi's orthodoxy while killing Xiao Hua. If I can bring this orthodoxy back to the clan, I will be rewarded by the patriarch. Isn't it killing two birds with one stone?" After the scholarly cultivator finished speaking, he raised his hand and put away the imperial weapon. Auspicious clouds appeared under his feet, and he flew toward another entrance, disappearing in a moment. This scholarly cultivator could follow Fairy Su Ming and others without being discovered. It was not only because of the strangeness of the imperial weapon, but also because the strength of this scholarly cultivator was far beyond Fairy Su Ming and other nascent soul stage cultivators. Another half a day later, dusk gradually rose. 3 Confucian cultivators dressed in bright yellow robes also appeared in the air on auspicious clouds. The 3 of them did not directly enter the formation. Instead, they first flew into the cave that Xue Ping and the others had opened up. After checking that there was no one there, they flew into the formation. The 3 of them looked at the 4 entrances again and again, whispered a few words, and chose a different entrance from Fairy Xiang Feng, Fairy Su Ming, and the scholarly cultivator and rushed in. From beginning to end, these 3 Confucian cultivators did not speak loudly, nor did they reveal their identities. Even if Xiao Hua and the others were nearby, it would be impossible for them to know the intentions of these 3 Confucian cultivators. However, since they had entered the misty mountain maze, they would definitely meet Xiao Hua and the others in the end. At that time, everything would come to light. Xiao Hua didn't expect that just as he entered the bewildering array, there would be 8 nascent soul cultivators chasing after him for revenge. He also didn't expect that there would be a Confucian cultivator at the 5th grade of essence energy following behind him. There were even 3 Confucian cultivators who entered the bewildering array with unknown motives. The development of the situation had long exceeded Xiao Hua's expectations. At this moment, he was flying steadily behind Xue Ping and the others. He released some of his soul sense and saw Fu Jiwen holding a palm-sized imperial disc in his hand, breaking through the maze while flying. The imperial disc in Fu Jiwen's hand was called the heart-calming disc. It was an imperial tool used by Confucian cultivators to break through bewildering arrays. The imperial tool was engraved with horizontal and vertical lines, and between the lines were common inscriptions such as A, B, C, D. Every time Fu Jiwen flew for a while, he would stop and mark something on the heart-calming disc. Every time he encountered a fork, he would activate the heart-calming disc. When a fingernail-sized inscription appeared on the disc, he would use the clear eyes technique to check it and then choose a suitable route from it. Xiao Hua had always been indifferent to bewildering arrays and directions. Seeing that Fu Jiwen was proficient in controlling it and hadn't encountered any danger after flying for a long time, he naturally understood that Fu Jiwen's heart-calming disc was very effective. Therefore, he simply ignored it and stayed on guard behind the others. Seeing that they had arrived at another fork in the road, facing 4 exits, Fu Jiwen activated the heart-calming disc. Clouds surged above the imperial tool and covered the entire imperial tool. The inscriptions were like ants rushing out from the inside. Fu Jiwen used the clear eyes technique to look down. In his eyes, the inscriptions were 4 big characters, each flashing with a different light. Fu Jiwen stretched out his finger and true qi rushed out. This true qi slowly moved along the lines of the heart-calming disc under the inscriptions. As Fu Jiwen's finger moved, the 4 big characters began to flicker and different places on the large characters began to extinguish. When Fu Jiwen's finger moved away from the lines and landed on the inscriptions, more than half of the light from the 2 big characters had already been extinguished. Fu Jiwen's finger moved as if he was playing a zither. Every time his finger touched an inscription, the remaining 2 inscriptions would move. The small inscriptions inside would either flicker or extinguish. After half a cup of tea's time, Fu Jiwen stopped and looked at the 2 inscriptions that were about the same brightness. He turned his head with a bitter smile and said, "Senior Xiao, this disciple is incompetent. I can't determine which of the 2 entrances is the real one." "No matter." Xiao Hua heard and flew to Fu Jiwen's side. He smiled and said, "Which 2 entrances?" When Fu Jiwen pointed them out, Xiao Hua released his soul sense and looked. He also shook his head and said, "This old man can't determine either. It seems that we can only force our way in. You all fly behind this old man. If there's anything wrong, immediately escape." "Yes, this junior understands." Xue Ping and the others' expressions tensed. They hurriedly retreated a few meters and bowed. "Let's take a look at this first." Xiao Hua casually pointed at the left entrance and said with a smile, "However, this Xiao seems to have a premonition that this Zhao's choice is most likely wrong. Then senior might as well go to the other entrance." Fu Jiwen said with a smile, "Wouldn't that be in the bag?" "How is that possible?" Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. "If this old man chooses that one, that entrance is most likely fake?" "Senior, is this mysterious?" Fu Jiwen was dumbfounded and looked at Xiao Hua in disbelief. "If you don't believe me, then follow me." Xiao Hua didn't say anything else and flew into the fork. Fu Jiwen and the others didn't dare to delay and followed behind. Sure enough, after flying for the time it took to eat a meal, the cave became deeper and deeper. A gloomy coldness came from the stone walls. Xiao Hua's soul sense was blocked and his soul sense also showed signs of being imprisoned. "Fu Jiwen, I'm afraid this is not good." Xiao Hua flew in front and asked, "Senior?" Fu Jiwen replied in a low voice, "This junior's imperial artifact heart calming plate can no longer be used here. This junior is not sure." Woo! Just at that moment, a chilly wind suddenly blew. This chilly wind did not blow out from within the cave, but instead seeped out from the stone wall near Xiao Hua and the others. However, Xiao Hua had naturally already inspected the stone wall when he flew over, and there was nothing abnormal there. This chilly wind was extremely strange. "Retreat!" Xiao Hua saw that something was wrong and made a prompt decision. With a wave of his sleeve, he covered the several people behind him and urged his magic power to retreat. Xiao Hua had just flown a few feet away when he heard a roar. Roar! Layers of fog seeped out from the stone wall about 100 feet away. This fog was thicker than ordinary clouds and fog, but thinner than demonic qi. Moreover, the fog emitted a sour and fishy smell, which was very unpleasant. Roar! Another roar sounded, and it was still emitted from within the fog. Xiao Hua's divine sense swept over, and that divine sense seemed to have been swallowed by the fog. There was some indescribable numbness. Strange! Xiao Hua was bewildered, because there weren't any strange beasts within the fog. He really didn't understand where this roar came from. However, Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. His body didn't slow down and he still retreated. Unfortunately, Xiao Hua was flying very fast, and the area covered by the fog was also very large. Xiao Hua flew a few more meters forward, and the fog was already blocking his path. Roar! Suddenly, the fog in front of Xiao Hua rolled and a strange beast head came out of the fog and bit down on Xiao Hua's head. At this time, Xiao Hua understood that this strange beast head was condensed from the fog. However, this fog itself was made of particles smaller than mung beans. These tiny worms could fly in the air. Moreover, when Xiao Hua's soul sense swept out, these worms seemed to be able to swallow Xiao Hua's soul sense. Xiao Hua's current soul sense was not simple. It was a soul sense that could be condensed into a hammer. Even this kind of soul sense could be swallowed by these worms. Ordinary soul sense would be torn apart by these worms. In particular, the roar of the strange beast that Xiao Hua heard before was not the roar of the beast head, but the trembling of these worms. What kind of strange worm is this? Xiao Hua didn't dare to rush in rashly. His figure retreated quickly. At the same time, he waved his hand and cast a spell. Boom! A huge fireball was born from the fog and fell into the mouth of the strange beast like an embroidered ball. What made Xiao Hua flabbergasted was that the fireball only made a rumbling sound before it landed in the mouth of the exotic beast. The head of the exotic beast, which was originally made up of worms, began to tumble again, like the waves of water. However, in just a moment, these rolling turned into calmness, as if nothing had happened. Furthermore, the worms around the beast's head had expanded by several times. Not good. Xiao Hua was shocked because after the beast had expanded, the worms that took advantage of him roared again and rushed over. Moreover, the nearby beast heads of different sizes frequently appeared and rushed towards the place where Xiao Hua's figure was located. This is Senior Tsong Lang Zi's Immortal Cave. These worms, in the end, they are for him to guard the door. Xiao Hua looked around. It was as if he was surrounded by these strange worms. There wasn't much space left for him. Xiao Hua couldn't help but think to himself, who is this old man guarding against? Taoist cultivators, Confucian cultivators, and Buddhist disciples are all possible. But he is a Taoist cultivator, so he naturally understands Taoist cultivators the most. If there is no accident, most of the things in this maze are things that can be used by Taoist cultivators. The restriction of divine sense is a clear proof, so if I use Taoist cultivators' divine sense, I'm afraid it will be half the result with twice the effort. Of course, this Xiao Hua's tempered golden body is not necessarily afraid of these strange worms, but this Xiao Hua won't use his own body as bait. While pondering, Xiao Hua raised his hand and grabbed a few worms out of thin air. Sure enough, the worms that were wrapped by Xiao Hua's magic power struggled frantically and tenaciously devoured the magic power. But when Xiao Hua opened his mouth and let out a mouthful of true qi, the worms immediately became obedient like flies blown by the autumn wind. What made Xiao Hua laugh even more was that these worms actually gathered together and condensed into a small beast head, letting out a very low roar, as if threatening Xiao Hua. Chapter 37-31. Hee, this is indeed interesting. Xiao Hua laughed heartily as he had a plan in mind. However, just as he was about to open his mouth to spit out the flying sword, his heart skipped a beat. Several soul threads fell from his glabella and pierced the worms. Things went so smoothly that it exceeded Xiao Hua's expectations. Against the soul threads, the worms did not put up any resistance at all and could not even detect them. As soon as the soul threads pierced through, the worms strangely disappeared without leaving a trace. Good. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and laughed in the face of the worms that were almost unstoppable by the Tao sect's divine ability. As the saying goes, skills don't weigh down the body. This saying is too true. With that said, Xiao Hua glanced at the Tao sect disciples beside him who were already trembling abnormally. At that moment, even Xue Ping and Fu Jiwen, who were extremely confident in Xiao Hua, turned pale. Fu Jiwen's body flashed with array talismans as he prepared to shield Xiao Hua from the front. Let's go. Xiao Hua waved his hand and said very calmly, Xue Ping, you and the other Tao sect disciples follow behind me. Fu Jiwen, activate the array talismans and follow behind. Yes, I understand. Seeing how calm Xiao Hua was, how could Fu Jiwen not know that Xiao Hua already had a way to deal with it? With a response, the inscriptions around him flowed and various array talismans began to form an inscription armor around him. With that said, Xiao Hua turned around and flew back. At that moment, he did not fly very fast, as though he was taking a leisurely stroll. However, what surprised Xue Ping behind him was that he did not see Xiao Hua use any divine ability. There was no brilliance, no dermic power fluctuation, no spell art, and not even a movement of his hand. Although the fog within 100 feet around them had hundreds of beast heads that were roaring madly and pouncing at them, it was as though a breeze had blown past. The fog was like the melancholy in one's chest that was swept away in an instant. There was no trace of it as it disappeared into thin air just like that. Xue Ping was ecstatic. He clenched his fists tightly and looked at the thin and tall cultivator in front of him with incomparable reverence. This was truly unfathomable. Exalted Sun Kong, Zhai Xingzi, Zhang Daoran, they were nothing to this seemingly ordinary cultivator. Sigh, what a pity. Just as Xue Ping was prostrating himself in worship, he suddenly felt a sense of regret. He turned his head slightly to look at Fu Jiwen. Why did I have thoughts of probing that day? If I can meet Zhenren Xiao for the first time and give him a good impression, won't I also be able to become his disciple? It's just that, the Taoist Xiao of that day, he really wasn't Taoist Xiao. He looks like that. How could he possibly be a senior of our Tao sect? But, how could Fu Jiwen have such an opportunity? According to Fu Jiwen, he met Taoist Master Xiao in the Bronze Pillar State, which was not long after me. What did this mean? I'm afraid I don't have such an opportunity. However, since I was able to invite Daoist Xiao here, and Daoist Xiao even invited seniors like Sun Kong, Zhang Daoran, and Jianghu to break through the Cloud Mountain Maze formation, isn't this my fortuitous encounter? Needless to say, Xue Ping's mind was filled with mixed feelings. Xiao Hua had already flown to the earliest fork in the road. Fu Jiwen, you do it. I'm at my wit's end, Xiao Hua called out with a smile. Fu Jiwen responded loudly and flew in front of his head with the heart-calming compass in hand. After flying for more than half a day, they did not see the end of the maze formation. Instead, they encountered many ferocious beasts, fog, yellow spring, and blazing objects. To Xue Ping and the rest, these were fatal things. However, to Xiao Hua, they only stunned him and made him admire Songlongzi a little more. They did not harm him at all. Fu Jiwen. Seeing that they had come out of another maze formation, Xiao Hua looked at the marks they had made when they entered and asked helplessly, "What we're doing now seems to be trying one by one. This heart-calming compass of yours actually doesn't have much use. Do you have any other convenient methods?" "I'll let you know, senior," Fu Jiwen said with a wry smile. "My heart-calming compass can already choose 4 out of 10. It's more than twice as fast as trying one by one. Furthermore, Senior Songlongzi's maze formation is really troublesome. I don't know why he set up so many traps in his cave abode." Xiao Hua rolled his eyes at Fu Jiwen and said, "Of course Senior Songlongzi knows how to get to his cave abode." In the old man's eyes, every fork in the road would have a mark that the old man himself knew. "We've spent so much time, and he's already sitting on the cloud bed." Yes, you're right, senior. Fu Jiwen nodded. "If I walk again, even if I enter the cave now, it won't take long for me to reach here." "There's another possibility," Xue Ping took the opportunity to say. "The entrance we entered is not the real entrance." "This? I don't know," Fu Jiwen looked at Xiao Hua and answered Xue Ping, "only by walking to the end." "Eh? There's someone? Who is it?" Suddenly, a smile appeared on Xiao Hua's face. He looked behind him and said with a smile, "Is it Brother Sun Kong or Brother Daoran? It can't be fellow Taoist Jianghu, right? Is that perfected Xiao in front?" Just as Xiao Hua looked up, an unfamiliar female cultivator's voice was heard. "Huh?" Xiao Hua was surprised and immediately became alert. Magic power surged around his body and he waved his hand, indicating for Fu Jiwen and the rest to fly behind him. Then he replied indifferently, "Who are you, fellow Taoist? How can you be here?" "Hee, so it really is perfected Xiao." The woman laughed coquettishly and said, "I am Li Qiuming. I received a message from Li Xiu and the other juniors. I knew that fellow Taoist wanted to break the Misty Mountains maze, so I hurried over. But what surprised me was that Taoist master had already broken the maze. I truly admire you." "Li Xiu?" Xue Ping, who was behind Xiao Hua, hurriedly transmitted his voice. "Senior Xiao, Li Xiu is one of my old friends that I invited earlier. However, he had already left before perfected Xiao arrived." "Yes, I understand." Xiao Hua nodded. "I'm afraid that Li Xiu thinks that I can't break the formation. You've already started inviting nascent soul cultivators, and he just happened to meet this woman." "It's possible." Xue Ping was still somewhat puzzled. He didn't say that he knew any nascent soul cultivators. While they were talking, Fairy Su Ming, who had chased into the maze formation of Cloud Mountain, had already appeared in the cave. Behind her were 3 nascent soul cultivators and several 2nd and 3rd grade disciples. "That's right, Li Xiu and Xiu are inside." Xue Ping hurriedly transmitted his voice when he saw the people who had arrived, seemingly believing them. "Hee, fellow Taoist Li is joking." Xiao Hua cupped his hands. "How could I have such a great ability? It was all thanks to Sun Kong, Zhang Daoran, and Jianghu. I just took advantage of them." "Hee," Fairy Su Ming laughed. "That's because perfected Xiao has a great reputation. Sun Kong, Zhang Daoran, and Jianghu are fellow Taoists that I've admired for a long time. I don't dare to say that I can invite all 3 of them here." While speaking, Fairy Su Ming looked around and said, "However, it seems that the 3 fellow Taoists aren't at this entrance. If I want to meet them, I have to go to Senior Songlang's cave." Xiao Hua didn't answer her. He looked at the people behind her and asked, "Fellow Taoist Li, did you only invite these few fellow Taoists? I don't think I've seen them before." "Hee hee, look at how silly I am." Fairy Su Ming patted her forehead and said self-deprecatingly, "I was so happy that I was able to follow the mark left by Perfected Xiao to this place. I forgot to introduce the 3 fellow Taoists to Perfected Xiao. This is fellow Taoist Xian Kong of Mountain Changming." Fairy Su Ming raised her hand and introduced. Xian Kong flew a few feet away and stood in the air, cupping his hands towards Xiao Hua. "Greetings, Perfected Xiao." "Greetings, fellow Taoist Xian Kong." Xiao Hua looked at Xian Kong and the others with a smile and hurriedly cupped his hands in return. "This is Perfected Yu Ming." Fairy Su Ming introduced again. Xiao Hua was slightly stunned and said with a smile, "Yu Ming? I met a cultivator before, and he seemed to be called Yu Ming. Where is this fellow Taoist? I haven't heard of a fellow Taoist with the same Taoist name as me." Perfected Yu Ming flew a few feet closer to Xiao Hua and cupped his hands in return. "That cultivator has already fallen. Even if I want to introduce you, I can't," Xiao Hua said with a smile. "This is Perfected Qiu Luo." Fairy Su Ming introduced the last cultivator. Perfected Yu Ming hurriedly moved aside, seemingly afraid of blocking Xiao Hua's way. "I've heard of the saying, falling leaves no autumn, but I don't know why fellow Taoist is called Qiu Luo." Xiao Hua smiled and asked casually. "Qiu Luo is a harvest. I hope to have more harvest on the road of cultivation." Perfected Qiu Luo explained with a smile, but his tone sounded a bit stiff. "Oh right." After Fairy Su Ming finished introducing the 3 nascent soul Taoists, Xiao Hua suddenly realized something and asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist Li, what's your Dharma name?" "Hee hee. Fellow Taoist Li's Dharma name is quite interesting. I'm afraid Perfected Xiao has heard of it before." Perfected Qiu Luo smiled and stepped aside, blocking Xian Kongzi's path. Xian Kongzi naturally flew a bit inwards. In this way, Xian Kongzi, Perfected Qiu Luo, and Perfected Yu Ming were right in the middle of Xiao Hua. "My Dharma name?" Fairy Su Ming seemed a bit shy and slightly lowered her head. "I'm sure Perfected Xiao has heard of it before." "What is it? Have I seen fellow Taoist before?" Xiao Hua tilted his head, quite puzzled. However, when he tilted his head, Xiao Hua frowned and became vigilant in his heart, because the position of the 4 nascent soul Taoists was very strange. At this time, Fairy Su Ming's eyes were red and she said sadly, "My Dharma name is Su Ming. I'm sure Perfected Xiao has heard of it before." "Fairy Su Ming?" Xiao Hua was stunned and blurted out, "I've never heard of it before." Chapter 37-32. Unfortunately, before he could finish speaking, Fairy Su Ming's beautiful face turned serious. She waved her small white hand and tossed a magic weapon into the air. She shouted, "I've come to take your life in Chu Feng's place. Just accept your fate." A pitch-black magic weapon flew out of Fairy Su Ming's hand like a bow and arrow. Under the activation of Fairy Su Ming's magic power, the magic weapon immediately produced a powerful impact force. Moreover, it flew in the air and let out a rumbling sound. Countless amounts of heaven and earth origin energy were absorbed by this magic weapon. "Master Chu Feng? Your Fairy Su Ming?" Perhaps Xiao Hua didn't remember Reverend Chu Feng, and he also forgot the Fairy Su Ming that Reverend Chu Feng mentioned when he threatened him. But seeing such a powerful magic weapon, how could he not remember the magic weapon that destroyed Reverend Jingting's physical body? Xiao Hua immediately understood that his karma had come. Not only that, when Fairy Su Ming activated her consumable magic tool, Xian Kongzi, Reverend Yu Ming, and Reverend Qiu Luo moved at the same time. They waved their hands in unison, and identical magic tools attacked Xiao Hua from 3 different directions. This cave wasn't big and the 4 were close to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua was caught off guard and only had time to activate his magic power. He spread out his hands and the 4 magic weapons let out a shrill sound as they landed on Xiao Hua's Taoist robe. Boom! The 4 consumable magic weapons let out a loud sound at the same time. Light overflowed and the powerful impact pushed Fu Jiwen and the others behind Xiao Hua far away. Fu Jiwen and the others were already injured by the magic weapons. Even Fairy Su Ming and the other nascent soul cultivators were pushed away by this force. Their bodies flickered with brilliance as the golden light protecting them flickered incessantly. Ha ha ha. Her voice reverberated throughout the entire cave. The stone walls on the left side of the cave were blown to smithereens. Following a series of explosions, layers of passages collapsed one after another. Fairy Su Ming's sharp laughter was especially ear-piercing. This arrogant female cultivator didn't have any thoughts of confrontation. As soon as she saw Xiao Hua, she wanted to kill him. She simply didn't care whether Xiao Hua was the real culprit or not. Unfortunately, before Fairy Su Ming's sharp laughter stopped, she saw a thin figure flying out of the air wave in a rather embarrassing state. Fairy Su Ming was like an old hen whose neck was bitten by a weasel. Jia. She couldn't laugh anymore. She looked at Xiao Hua in the air in disbelief. Although Xiao Hua's Taoist robe had already been torn to shreds, the golden light protecting his body had already been extinguished, and there were even several fresh wounds on his naked body. However, these scars did not reach the bone, nor did they break his arms or legs. They were also not torn apart like Fairy Su Ming had imagined. What was special was that these scars were flashing with a dark gold color, as if they were slowly healing. How is this possible? Fairy Su Ming was fully aware of the power of the artifact she refined. Moreover, the artifact was activated by 4 nascent soul cultivators at once. Even a cultivator with 5th grade essence force would not be able to resist it, so how could Xiao Hua be safe and sound? However, after a moment of surprise, Fairy Su Ming didn't hesitate to turn into a rainbow. Dazzling flames shone on her body as she rushed towards Xiao Hua in mid-air. Nascent soul self-detonation. Taoist Qiu Luo, who was closest to Fairy Su Ming, turned pale with fright. He really didn't expect Fairy Su Ming to be so crazy. This was the maze of Zonglongzi's Immortal Cave. If she self-detonated here, not only would Fairy Su Ming perish together with Xiao Hua, Taoist Qiu Luo and all the other cultivators would be buried together with her. Taoist Qiu Luo didn't dare to hesitate anymore. He simply ignored his unstable body and urged his magic power to escape. However, just as he flew a few feet, pang! A loud sound rang out as his body hit the stone wall. The explosion of the 4 artifacts had already changed the cave. At this moment, huge rocks were piled up behind Taoist Qiu Luo. Boom! A dazzling brilliance flashed before Taoist Qiu Luo's eyes and an even more powerful explosion rang in his ears. Taoist Qiu Luo's heart suddenly sank. He truly regretted believing this arrogant and domineering woman. Everything she promised him now seemed to be nothing more than a scheme. Whoosh! Just at that moment of imminent peril, a sound akin to the spring rain moisturizing things could be heard. Following the descent of Xiao Hua's hands, not only did the loud sound disappear, even the resplendent light disappeared without a trace. See! Taoist Qiu Luo seemed to be even more shocked than seeing Fairy Su Ming perish together with Xiao Hua. Because of Xiao Hua's spell, Fairy Su Ming's already collapsed body froze in place. The filthy blood that flowed out also stopped there. The nascent soul that emerged from Fairy Su Ming's body also blankly stood still in mid-air. What is this ability? Is this a mid-nascent soul stage cultivator? Taoist Qiu Luo only had this thought. When he looked at Xiao Hua again, he narrowed his eyes and looked at Fairy Su Ming's malevolent face that was about to collapse. He said indifferently, "You've been tricked by Taoist Yuanqing. You're only here to kill me for him. But I can tell you that I did kill Taoist Yuanqing because he deserved to be killed. Not only did he rely on his strength, but he also bullied the weak and injured innocent cultivators. I'm afraid Taoist Yuanqing doesn't dare to tell you the details. Of course, it's meaningless for me to tell you now. Not only do you not believe me, but..." With that, Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Su Ming's bloodshot eyes. There was no remorse or apology in those bloodshot eyes, only hatred. Xiao Hua sighed and raised his hand. Fairy Su Ming's nascent soul fell into his hand. Her tattered body exploded into pieces and scattered on the ground. Xiao Hua raised his hand and picked up Fairy Su Ming's Chenkuan pouch. Sure enough, it was almost empty. Presumably, she had already arranged everything before coming here. Xiao Hua raised his hand and held the Kunlun mirror in his hand. A 6-colored brilliance flashed and Fairy Su Ming's nascent soul was taken into the Kunlun ruins. Humph! Xiao Hua took Fairy Su Ming's nascent soul and looked coldly at Taoist Qiu Luo. "Spare me, Taoist Qiu Luo. Spare me." Taoist Qiu Luo's heart turned cold. He hurriedly shouted, "We were just deceived by Fairy Su Ming and fell into her trap. I am also a victim." Unfortunately, as Xiaohua looked at Taoist Qiu Luo, although Taoist Qiu Luo could still shout, the true qi in his body had already begun to solidify. Xiaohua's eyes were even colder. Taoist Qiu Luo knew that today's matter would not end well. He made up his mind and desperately urged his magic power. Wu! Streams of heaven and earth essence gathered. A large hand clenched into a fist and smashed toward Xiaohua. At the same time, Taoist Qiu Luo opened his mouth and wanted to spit out a magic treasure. Swoosh! At this moment, a golden light appeared out of nowhere. In an instant, the golden light flew in front of his neck. Moreover, it was as if a sharp awl had pierced into his Naiwan palace. It was so painful that Taoist Qiu Luo's magic power stagnated. In an instant, the golden light split Taoist Qiu Luo's body into two halves. His condensed nascent soul hurriedly escaped from his body. Unfortunately, before his nascent soul could teleport, the Kunlun mirror's light pillar fell again. Facing the three nascent soul cultivators who could not be considered the culprits, Xiaohua was decisive in killing them. He did not hesitate to destroy their bodies and suppress their nascent souls in the Kunlun ruins. This was because Xiaohua really hated these seemingly innocent lackeys to the core. If he had not tempered his golden body in the rockfall formation, and if his magic power had not far surpassed theirs, he would have been the one who died here today. On the other hand, these accomplices who used the name of being innocent and wore the hat of the ignorant or not guilty, enjoyed the benefits that Fairy Su Ming had promised in advance and the rare treasures in Songlongzi's cave abode with a clear conscience. Even Fu Jiwen was dumbfounded. Those were 4 nascent soul cultivators, but they were killed by his master like chickens and geese. How strong was his master's true strength? Unknowingly, Fu Jiwen thought of what Bai Wu had said to him. After a while, Fu Jiwen came to his senses. He flew to the front with difficulty and asked in a low voice, "Master, those few low-level disciples, how should we deal with them?" Xiaohua glanced at Fu Jiwen. Although Fu Jiwen's formation talismans were flowing around him to protect him, his scholarly robe was also damaged. It was obvious that he was injured in the explosion of the magic tool just now. Xiaohua asked in return, "What do you think?" Leading the wolf into the house is embarrassing. Leaking information is treacherous. Such a treacherous person is not worthy of being a disciple of my Dao sect. Fu Jiwen unexpectedly also thought of himself as a disciple of the Dao sect. Xiaohua nodded slightly, then looked at Fu Jiwen killingly Xiao and the others. He sighed in his heart. "I once swore to the heavens that I would never kill an innocent person. But, even so, the number of people who died in my hands is more than 1. It seems that I have a reason to kill them. Is it because I have a hard heart, or is the world changing too fast? Oh, when did I make such a great wish?" Suddenly, Xiaohua was stunned. There was an inconceivable expression on his face. This great wish is too child's play, right? It was as if a distant memory had sprouted in his heart. Fairy Su Ming's destructive power was really great. Her appearance not only caused 3 nascent soul cultivators to lose their physical bodies like her, but also caused their nascent souls to be suppressed by Xiaohua. Even several low-level disciples lost their lives. Now, in addition to Fu Jiwen's serious injuries, Xue Ping and the others also had injuries of varying degrees. Although several of them had taken medicinal pills, it was obvious that they could not rely on their own strength for the rest of the journey. "Xue Ping." Xiaohua glanced at them and said, "The fire at the city gate also affects the fish in the moat. Because of me, you were also injured. For the rest of the journey, why don't we follow what this old man has discussed with you before? This old man will suppress you all into the country weapon and bring you all into the cave. If there is a suitable opportunity, this old man will let you all out. What do you think?" Chapter 37-33. Xue Ping and the rest smiled bitterly. What was a suitable opportunity? This opportunity was in Xiaohua's hands, not theirs. Even if Xiaohua didn't let them out, they had nothing to say. However, if they didn't enter the country treasure, they probably wouldn't be able to enter again. What other choice did they have in such a hopeless situation? After Xue Ping and the rest were stored in the mountain river seal, Fu Jiwen relaxed and smiled. "Master, Your methods are truly amazing. I don't know how to respect you. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, every skill has its own specialization. Master has some methods that you can't learn. You should cultivate the wordless heavenly book in your dantian to the extreme. That's your greatest fate. Yes, disciple understands. Fu Jiwen replied with a smile. Then he raised the heart control plate in his hand and said, disciple also needs to cultivate this thing well. Humph. Although Xiaohua snorted coldly, there wasn't any anger on his face. He raised his finger and pointed at the messy cave. Then Master will see how your cultivation is going. Master, please wait a moment. Fu Jiwen was very happy. He didn't really activate the heart control plate. Instead, he looked around and raised his hand respectfully. Master, this way please. Wait a moment. Xiaohua wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he flipped his hand and took out the one heart toad. He activated his magic power and shouted a few times, but no one else's voice came from the toad's mouth. Damn it, this thing looks good, but here, it's just a decoration. Forget it, we'll just go our own way. There's no need to count on others. Xiaohua put away the one heart toad and said indifferently. With Fu Jiwen's guidance and Xiaohua's abijna, the two of them quickly reached the end of the cave. They were as nimble as when they charged into the Imperial Academy with bronze pillars. However, when they reached the end, the two of them frowned. It was very simple. There was nothing at the end of the cave. It was clean as if someone had just cleaned it. Master, it seems like we chose the wrong entrance. Fu Jiwen looked up and down and used the eye-clearing technique. He even urged the array talismans and inscriptions in his body to rush into the stone wall, but the stone wall did not respond. Fu Jiwen said somewhat dejectedly. Xiaohua was naturally unwilling to give up. He urged his divine sense to rush into the stone wall. The stone wall was the same as the other places in the cave. There was a layer of extremely strong restriction that blocked divine sense. Although Xiaohua's divine sense was like a hammer, it was blocked after rushing in a few dozen feet. Xiaohua retracted his divine sense and activated the earth escape technique. His figure was the same as his divine sense, but after entering a few dozen feet, he was forced out by a powerful force. Could it really be a dead end? Xiaohua sighed. It seems that this Zhao's luck has come to an end. However, Xiaohua pondered for a moment and said to Fu Jiwen, move back a bit. After Fu Jiwen retreated a few feet, Xiaohua raised his hand and took out the Kunlun mirror. Under the activation of his mana, a six-colored light pillar rushed out and landed on the stone wall. Crystal threads flickered on the stone wall like layers of flames, blocking the light beam of the Kunlun mirror outside the stone wall. Even his divine will was not as deep as hers. Oh! Just as Xiaohua retracted the Kunlun mirror and was about to use the delusion breaker Dharma Eye, his gaze suddenly fell on the stone wall. He could see with the naked eye that there was a faint imprint on the surface of the stone wall. This imprint seemed to be a human shape, but the imprint was very faint. If he did not look carefully, he would not be able to see it with only Taoism divine abilities. See! Xiaohua suddenly thought of the benevolent Taoist master of the single Yang kingdom. He took a deep breath and was stunned on the spot. For a full 5 minutes, Fu Jiwen, who was far away, did not dare to step forward without Xiaohua's instructions. He looked at the motionless Xiaohua with some worry. Just as he was pondering and about to speak, Xiaohua's voice, unable to restrain his pleasant surprise, was heard. Fu Jiwen, your opportunity has come. Master. Fu Jiwen was surprised. He hurriedly walked to Xiaohua's side and looked up and down. He was puzzled. You found a way out? Hee, of course it's not a way out. Xiaohua pointed at the human shape on the stone wall and smiled. Take a look. Is this a human figure sitting cross-legged in meditation? This. Fu Jiwen squinted his eyes and looked for a long time. He still did not dare to make a conclusion. He only smiled and said, if Master did not say so, I really would not be able to see it. Actually, it's more or less the same if it's another shadow. This was the good thing about Fu Jiwen. Although he was facing his master, he was still willing to share his opinion. This was also one of the things that Xiaohua admired about Fu Jiwen. Sit down and try. Xiaohua pointed at the ground and smiled. I think this should be where Senior Tsong Longzi used to meditate. This shadow was also left behind by him. Even if it's not an exit, as long as you sit there, you should be able to gain something. Of course, whether it's what I said or not, you'll know once you try. Yes, master. As Fu Jiwen spoke, he was about to sit down cross-legged. However, Fu Jiwen immediately smiled and said, I've cultivated more in Confucianism. I'm afraid that my Taoist techniques are inferior to Xue Ping's. Master, it's best if Xue Ping comes out and tries. Yes, that makes sense. Xiao Hua nodded and released Xue Ping and the others from the mountain river seal. When Xue Ping and the others saw the end of the cave, they naturally did not look good. However, when Xiao Hua explained his guess, their eyes shone with extraordinary splendor. Yes, what was their purpose in coming to the Misty Mountain Maze formation? Wasn't it just to obtain Songlongzi's legacy? Wanting to obtain the essence and comprehension of cultivation from the artifacts, jade slips, and other items left behind by Taoist seniors? This human figure sounded inconceivable, but it was absolutely possible if one thought about it carefully. In particular, although Songlongzi possessed remarkable abilities, he would not have spent so much effort to set up such a useless maze formation. Senior, please experience it first. Xue Ping understood and hurriedly bowed. Xiao Hua waved his hand. Putting aside the fact that this Misty Mountain Maze formation is your greatest contribution, I have to let you guys experience it first if there's any opportunity. Even if you came purely with me to break through the maze formation, I have the responsibility to protect your safety. You guys can experience it first, I can observe from the side. If anything happens, I can stop you in time. Alright. Then I'll go first. Xue Ping knew that this was an attempt. Moreover, there was no use of magic power to attack, so there might not be any danger. Moreover, Xiao Hua was extremely right. If anything happened with the old man beside him, what was there to be afraid of? Then, Xue Ping sat cross-legged in front of the faintly discernible human figure and closed his eyes to meditate. After a long while, Xue Ping completed 3 circulations. Apart from the faint sound of the wind, there were no other changes. Perhaps I'm wrong? Xiao Hua released his spiritual sense and watched as magic power surged around Xue Ping's body. Even when the waves landed on the stone wall, there were no changes to the stone wall. Senior. Xue Ping opened his eyes and was about to speak to Xiao Hua when he suddenly shouted and pointed at the stone wall. Enlightened one, as expected. I understand now. After saying that, Xue Ping did not explain anything to Xiao Hua. He opened his eyes and looked at the stone wall as he once again activated his mental cultivation method. Xiao Hua and the rest were overjoyed when they saw this. They focused their attention on the stone wall and Xue Ping. Xue Ping activated his mental cultivation method again and again. Although there were no changes to the stone wall, Xue Ping's face that should have been as calm as water was now filled with excitement. There were even traces of redness. Seeing Xue Ping's abnormality, Xiao Hua frowned. The most important thing about stopping him was whether there were any attacks on the stone wall. Seeing the abnormality in Xue Ping's heart and eyes, Xiao Hua really did not know whether to stop him or not. This is difficult. Xiao Hua slowly raised his hand and was a little hesitant. If Xue Ping encounters a great opportunity, I will be hated by others. Fortunately, Xiao Hua did not have to make any choice. Just as Xiao Hua raised his hand and did not circulate his dermic powers, he saw tens of thousands of runes surge out from the stone wall. These runes tumbled like a tidal wave and instantly annihilated Xue Ping. Xiao Hua's hand was originally raised and he hurriedly wanted to cast the heaven and earth in the sleeve technique. However, when his dermic powers reached Xue Ping's corporeal body, it was as though the runes were smoke and dust. Furthermore, when the runes fell back to the stone wall, Xue Ping disappeared as well. All right. Xiao Hua was a little anxious just now. When he saw this, how could he not understand that this was a legacy left behind by Senior Songlongzi? Xue Ping must have seen something when facing the shadow left behind by Senior Songlongzi when he cultivated. Xiao Hua did not know what Xue Ping had obtained, but at least he knew that this was Senior Songlongzi's painstaking effort. Xue Ping would not be in danger. At the very least, Xue Ping had already passed through the Misty Mountain Maze. Who's next? Xiao Hua's gaze swept across the remaining cultivators as he asked with a smile. Since Xue Ping was fine, the others were naturally eager to go forward. However, Xiao Hua's question made them feel awkward. No one was willing to take the first step. You! Xiao Hua naturally understood what they were thinking. He casually pointed at the cultivator closest to him and said with a smile, "Anyway, this thing has been here for millions of years. It won't disappear after being used once or twice. It doesn't matter who is in front." "Thank you, Senior Xiao." That cultivator was overjoyed and hurriedly took 2 steps forward. Like Shui Ping, he opened his eyes and watched the shadow cultivate. As expected, it was the 9 revolutions technique again. That cultivator's reaction was exactly the same as Shui Ping's. Then, runes surged out and pulled him into the stone wall before he disappeared. After several Dao sect cultivators entered the stone wall one by one, Xiao Hua said to Fujiwen, "Fujiwen, it's your turn. You won't let me go in first, right?" "Yes, I understand." Fujiwen sat down cross-legged and looked at the shadow just like Shui Ping and the rest. To Xiao Hua's surprise, Fujiwen's brows furrowed even more after he cultivated several times. However, the runes on the stone wall did not surge out. "Master." Fujiwen circulated a few more times and stopped. He then said, "I'm afraid I have no fate with Senior Zonglongzi's cave abode. I didn't see anything." Chapter 37-34. That's impossible. Xiao Hua pinched his chin and looked at the faint figure. The figure didn't change even though a few Taoist cultivators had entered. After looking at it for a while, Xiao Hua was puzzled. Although you're a Confucian cultivator, you're also proficient in Taoist techniques. Your mental cultivation method is also a genuine Taoist technique. Besides, since Senior Zonglongzi could set up Taoist, Confucian, and Buddhist formations outside the maze, he wouldn't differentiate between Taoist, Confucian, and Buddhist. "Oh, I understand now." Xiao Hua patted his forehead and shouted, "Disciple, you don't have to use the Taoist mental cultivation method. You just have to take out your wordless heavenly book." "Okay, this disciple is the best at it." Fujiwen was suddenly awakened. The noble qi around his body surged. A ray talisman surged out of his body and turned into thousands of butterflies fluttering in the cave. His eyes were fixed on the figure. In just a moment, thousands of talismans surged out from behind the figure on the stone wall. However, what surprised Xiao Hua was that these talismans were completely different from those of Shui Ping and the others. They were actually armor inscriptions. Furthermore, these inscriptions did not rush out in an irregular manner like the tides from before. Instead, they condensed into the shape of a scroll and flew out. It was as if the humanoid figure had taken out a scroll from his body and presented it to Fujiwen. Boom! Thousands of noble qi pillars rushed out from the book. The book completely exploded and transformed into a complete picture of mountains and rivers. Buzz! The talismans that were flying around Fujiwen let out a strong roar and rushed into the book. Fujiwen's eyes were also filled with surprise. His body that was sitting cross-legged slowly flew towards the book. The armor inscriptions that turned into mountains and rivers were like little fluorescent lights that wrapped around Fujiwen's body. They happily pushed Fujiwen slowly into the stone wall. Good! Xiao Hua clapped his hands. In his heart, he knew that Fujiwen was able to pry into the mystery of the wordless heavenly book by chance. However, because his cultivation base and realm were limited, it was difficult for the wordless heavenly book to be complete. The heavenly heart inside Xiao Hua's dantian was actually different from the wordless heavenly book. If Xiao Hua wanted to guide Fujiwen's cultivation, he would have to start from the wordless heavenly book. Master Zonglongzi of antiquity times was also proficient in Confucian cultivation. Perhaps he did not understand the wordless heavenly book, but he was a Taoist cultivator at the tribulation passing stage. The legacy he left behind was enough to complete Fujiwen's wordless heavenly book. Just based on this point alone, Fujiwen's trip was indeed daunting but not dangerous. If Fujiwen was injured by Fairy Su Ming's self-explosion, then Fujiwen was indeed blessed in disguise. Xiao Hua rubbed his nose. He thought about his specious divination earlier and thought to himself, Fujiwen can cultivate in my Kunlun ruins in the future and never come out again. However, Miss Wanwan's Minglu chain has not been removed yet. I'm afraid Fujiwen's adventure has just begun. As he thought about it, Xiao Hua's gaze fell on the faint human figure. His eyes were filled with anticipation. He did not expect that the ancient senior Zonglongzi would give him a surprise. Junior thanks Senior Xianxia from afar. Xiao Hua was very respectful. He bowed to the human figure and then sat cross-legged on the ground. He looked up at the human figure and began to circulate his mental cultivation method. The human figure was originally very faint, but after looking at it for a long time, the human figure actually became obvious. It was like an old man in Taoist robes. Even a nascent soul cultivator like Xiao Hua was a little absent-minded when his gaze fell on the old man's face. The old man's face began to change. He was young, old, a woman, or a child. His Taoist robes were also changing. He was either a Confucian robe, battle armor, or a monk's robe. As time gradually passed, his face even turned into mountains, water, rivers, birds, and beasts. Occasionally, a huge flying boat would rush out. At this moment, Xiao Hua was no longer focused on activating his mental cultivation method. Instead, he focused on watching all the changes in front of him. He felt that these changes were very important. If he could find some hidden clues from the changes, his cultivation would definitely advance by leaps and bounds. Wang. After an unknown amount of time, Xiao Hua only felt that his eyes suddenly lit up, and a feeling of turning into a feather spontaneously arose. His entire body felt light, and his entire body was like a goose feather, floating in the sky. There was no need to use his eyes to look. The sky was incomparably blue, and the ground was incomparably vast. It was as if he was the entire sky, and also as if he was the entire earth. Xiao Hua's heart was filled with incomparable fullness. Following this feeling, Xiao Hua's state of mind gradually relaxed. He also let down his guard. Not only did he circulate his Taoist cultivation method, the 5 Qis origin, the dragonization art, the immortal body bestowment technique, and so on also began to circulate. Rumble. Suddenly, the entire sky darkened. Thick clouds instantly covered the horizon. Countless lightning bolts fell from the sky. At the same time, the entire earth cracked. Countless mountains and rivers collapsed. Countless huge peaks rushed out from the ground and pierced straight into the sky. Within the huge peaks, lava spewed out for thousands of feet. It rushed into the sky and collided with the lightning bolts. Mountain rocks filled the sky, torrential rain poured down, mountain floods covered the earth, and whales were everywhere. Roar! Suddenly, a giant whose height was unknown stepped over from the distance. This giant's appearance was exactly Xiao Hua's. Boom! The giant broke a huge hole in the sky with a punch. Boom! Another kick flattened all the huge peaks on the ground. Then, he actually stepped on the void and walked up to the sky. His hands and feet danced. It was actually the Big Dipper divine fist. Following the giant's fist, all the clouds, lightning, and thunder fell into his hands. All the mountain rocks, floodwater, and lava also fell between the giant's feet. And after the Big Dipper divine fist was finished, roar! The giant unexpectedly let out a dragon's roar. His entire body stretched out in midair and turned into a dragon. The dragon's body stretched for an unknown length. His entire body danced strangely in the sky. And along with the dance, a sacred aura, a dignified voice, and a kind of irresistible power spread throughout the entire world. After an unknown amount of time, boom! The dragon's body collapsed and turned into a torrent. That torrent was formed by strange characters that were bigger than a mountain. The torrent rushed into the sky, and it was a tragic scene of heaven and earth collapsing. Swish! Following the opening of a pair of eyes that seemed to be supporting the heaven and earth, that torrent fell between the eyes. The entire world also turned into fragments and rushed into the starry sky like eyes. Xiao Hua's happy face was then revealed. Moreover, like the finishing touch, Xiao Hua's entire body gradually appeared from the fragments. But the strange thing was, after the fragments, the entire world became empty again. Xiao Hua calmly stood in this empty space with a smile hanging on the corner of his mouth. He seemed to be talking to himself. Congratulations, fellow Taoist bone tempering. This time, our first harvest is actually fellow Taoist. Even I would never have thought that my Tao sect senior Xianxia actually hid the Dragon Clan's bone tempering technique. Damn it, this is a secret technique that can even temper dragon bones. Fellow Taoist bone tempering, you should be secretly happy. Bullshit. A rough voice came from Xiao Hua's body. How can I, your father, understand this secret technique? I don't understand the dragon language, let alone the dragon language. Fellow Taoist bone tempering, don't be impatient. Dragon Vein Xiaohua's voice was full of dignity. Leave this matter to me. As long as fellow Taoist Jade Archive obtains the dragon language explanation, I will be able to understand this secret technique. Once I understand it, I just need to destroy the Jade Archive and inform fellow Taoist bone tempering. Isn't that enough? Then I'll have to trouble fellow Taoist Dragon Vein. Although bone tempering Xiaohua was unruly and filled with a desolate aura, facing Dragon Vein Xiaohua's grace, he was still extremely polite. Dragon language. Xiaohua smiled bitterly. Where should I go to find this? Just as he was thinking, Xiaohua felt a gentle but irresistible force pushing him. His vision blurred, and his body landed in a huge secret room. Xiaohua landed and looked back. Behind him was an incomparably smooth stone wall. It was similar to the entrance of the cave from before, but there were no traces of it. Clearly, Xiaohua flew out from this stone wall. At this point, Xiaohua was too lazy to use his delirium vision to look at the restrictions on the stone wall. Although he understood the Tao of formations, he had only cultivated for a few hundred years after all. Most of his time was spent running for his life. Such a marvelous formation was not something he could set up. Xiaohua very naturally looked around. In front of him, under the stone wall, Xueping and several other Tao sect cultivators were sitting with their eyes closed. The magic power around their bodies was slightly surging. Clearly, they were comprehending what they had obtained from the stone wall. As for Fu Jiwen, his aura was even more arrogant. Layers of runes flickered with brilliance, causing clouds to emerge from his body and tightly wrap around him. The runes once again formed a talisman array, flowing either quickly or slowly. When it was fast, Xiaohua's naked eye could barely catch it. When it was slow, it was like a crawling snail. Clearly, it was a critical moment in his cultivation. Xiaohua glanced at it, then looked elsewhere. He saw that this was a rather spacious cave. Aside from the smooth stone walls everywhere, there were some stalactites of different heights hanging down from the top of the mountain. The light in the entire cave was emitted from these stalactites. However, this light was different from the stalactites Xiaohua had seen before. They were not colorful, but a pure milky white, similar to the light in the sky. As soon as he saw the stalactites, Xiaohua's eyes lit up. He hurriedly looked below the stalactites. Unfortunately, after looking for a long time, the bottom of those stalactites was empty. There was no stalactite at all. Tsk tisk. Xiaohua smacked his lips and thought to himself, what a pity. If there was some stalactite, this trip would not have been in vain. Xiaohua's gaze immediately shifted to the stalactites, then he looked inside the cave again. Moreover, his divine sense also very naturally spread out. There are no restrictions on divine sense inside the cave? Xiaohua was slightly delighted. After a moment, he clearly saw the situation inside the cave. Chapter 37-35. Since he could clearly see the situation of the entire mountain cave, Xiaohua's figure didn't stop and flew towards the depths of the mountain cave. Because at the center of the mountain cave, there was a small pond. On top of the pond, there was a small jade table. On top of the jade table, there were 3 things of different sizes. Xiaohua didn't fly fast, and his divine sense quickly swept around the pond. Moreover, the Fa Li in his body surged, ready to receive attacks from the jade table at any time. But to Xiaohua's surprise, when he landed next to the jade table, he didn't encounter any restrictions. Everything was normal. Hee hee. Xiaohua's eyes lit up, and the corner of his mouth couldn't hide the smile. He stretched out his hand and looked at the space around him. He really didn't dare to believe that he could get the treasures in this cave so easily. Gotcha! Just when Xiaohua's Fa Li touched the 3 items on the jade table, a layer of small thunderbolts appeared out of thin air. These thunderbolts hit the back of Xiaohua's hand with lightning speed. Although Xiaohua's thunder-attracting technique was successful and his body was tempered, under these thunderbolts, half of Xiaohua's body was numb. The condensed true essence was completely dissipated by the thunderbolts. Xiaohua couldn't even stand steadily, and with a pu sound, he fell in front of the jade table. Fortunately, there were no restrictions in front of the jade table. Xiao Hua stood straight for a moment and silently circulated his heart sutra several times. Only then did the numbness gradually dissipate. Damn, this senior Songlongzi is too stingy. Xiao Hua looked at the items on the jade table with some envy. He touched his nose and bitterly smiled. No matter what, this Xiao is still a junior of the Dao sect. Since I'm already here, why don't you open the door? Xiao Hua carefully looked at the jade table. On the left of the jade table, there was a black cloud pupil. In the middle was an inch-long magic weapon. It looked like a flute with a few small holes. On the right was a jade bottle with a talisman. If he didn't guess, there should be a spirit pill inside. Cultivation method, magic weapon, and spirit pill. Xiao Hua secretly thought. It seems that this must be Senior Songlongzi's cave. These three things are left for the Dao sect's disciples. Hee, this Xiao is rich now. While speaking, Xiao Hua used his divine sense to scan the surrounding stone walls. He didn't see Xianxia and the others coming in. He knew that if they hadn't been delayed in the maze, it meant that Songlongzi's secluded abode was not the only abode. However, looking at the platform behind the jade table, Xiao Hua didn't think that there would be any other immortal's cave behind this maze. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua unceremoniously opened his delirium dharma eye. If there were benefits to be had, he would naturally make the first move. Hiss. When Xiao Hua saw that the three treasures were covered in thick, ball-like restrictions, layers upon layers of restrictions. Each layer had many runes flowing within it, and each rune contained a powerful might. Looking again at that unremarkable jade case, it similarly had unparalleled runes flowing with light, truly blinding Xiao Hua's dog eyes. Motherfucker! When Xiao Hua saw the stream of light below his feet, he suddenly jumped up from the ground. This pool of water also has a restriction? Could it be that the pond water was also a treasure? This jade case's restriction is connected to the entire Immortal's Cave's formation? Of course, he saw that the entire pond was flashing with 5 colors, and within the 5 colors, there were also black and white auras floating elegantly. The brilliance of the 5 colors was connected to the flowing light of the jade case. As for the depths of the pond, there was actually a restriction that blocked Xiao Hua's delirium dharma eye. With Xiao Hua's current cultivation level, he couldn't see to the bottom. Withdrawing his delirium dharma eye, Xiao Hua looked with his naked eyes and once again sucked in a breath of cold air, almost crying out involuntarily. Because not far from Xiao Hua's feet, there was a spiritual tree that was standing in the water like a swallow. The spiritual tree looked very withered, but the clump of purple cloud-like fluff on the top of the swallow's head was extremely eye-catching. This is spiritual wisdom? Could it be that Senior Songlongzi also prepared to cultivate the scattered nascent soul? After recovering from his shock, Xiao Hua carefully examined it, and only after a while did he dare to confirm it. After all, this was a spiritual object of heaven and earth needed to cultivate the scattered nascent soul. Although Xianxongzi's ink cloud pupil only mentioned its name, and this object wasn't necessary to cultivate the scattered nascent soul, it was extremely important to the cultivation of the scattered nascent soul. Xiao Hua originally placed his focus on Renjing, but he didn't expect that after searching high and low for so long, he would find it without any effort. Renjing was actually the mother-child spiritual fruit. As for this spiritual wisdom, Xiao Hua had never thought about it, but strangely, when Xiao Hua saw this spiritual tree, he naturally thought of spiritual wisdom. Sure enough, this is a memory that I don't know where I got it from. Xiao Hua pondered for a moment. After confirming that it was the spiritual tree, he thought for another moment and slightly shook his head. Unfortunately, there's still no heaven soul and earth soul in these memories. Perhaps these two spiritual treasures are the same as Renjing, completely different from the names in ancient times, so I can't find them. Although Xiao Hua had more than 100 nascent soul cultivators to cultivate the scattered nascent soul, this spiritual wisdom tree certainly couldn't meet the needs of these scattered nascent souls. Looking at Xiao Hua's space, he wasn't afraid of not having enough. As long as he had this spiritual wisdom tree, it wouldn't take long to meet the needs of all the scattered nascent souls. Finished thinking, Xiao Hua stretched out his right hand and gently waved it. Ka-cha-cha, sure enough, a layer of fine thunderbolts appeared out of thin air and fell on Xiao Hua's right hand. Fortunately, Xiao Hua was already prepared and hurriedly pulled back his hand. who knew that the thunderbolt would still mercilessly fall in the direction of Xiao Hua's hand. See. Just now the left half of his body was numb, and now the right half of his body was numb. Xiao Hua grimaced as he stood beside the jade table and shook his hand vigorously. He looked very uncomfortable. Seeing this, Xiao Hua didn't dare to try again. He squatted down and looked at it with his illusion-breaking eyes. He pinched his chin and secretly thought, spiritual will hammer or wishful staff should be enough, but the counterforce of this restriction is also huge. This is a restriction set up by a tribulation-passing cultivator. If I don't handle it well, I might cause some trouble and end up losing the rice used to lure it. The safest choice is still spiritual fire. Thinking of the spiritual fire that didn't even have any heat, Xiao Hua had a headache. Although this thing has been tempered, he didn't see any special effect. Moreover, the spiritual power consumed by activating it once was also particularly huge. It simply didn't care how deep Xiao Hua's spiritual power was and directly consumed half of it. Therefore, after the Kunlun mirror and overturn the sea seal were successfully refined, Xiao Hua would only consider using it in a life-and-death situation. However, now that Xiao Hua wanted to use the spiritual fire, it was obvious that Xiao Hua could only use it twice. At most 3 times. Then his spiritual power would be exhausted. Even if he had a nascent soul, it wouldn't be enough. In other words, Xiao Hua had to choose where to use it twice or thrice. At this time, although Xiao Hua, who didn't care much about vitality stones, greedily looked at the 3 treasures and Yan Lingji in front of him, he was quite unable to make a choice. The magic treasure left by Senior Tsong Longzi is definitely not ordinary. If it's not a spiritual weapon, it's a spiritual treasure. Maybe it's even a heavenly spiritual treasure. Xiao Hua thought to himself. However, I can refine spiritual weapons now. Moreover, green-robed Xiao Hua also said that although some of the magic treasures in my space aren't very good, after the separation of yin and yang, they may become heavenly spiritual treasures. In particular, the Kunlun mirror is now complete. Although it hasn't been refined successfully, the possibility of it becoming a spiritual treasure is very high. The Overturn the Sea Seal also has a weapon spirit inside. In the future, it will be promoted to a spiritual treasure as soon as possible. Therefore, I don't need to consider this spiritual treasure. Then there are the medicinal pills and cultivation methods. I now have Do Shanjuan's Mo Yun Tong, which recorded almost complete cultivation methods. Although Senior Tsong Longzi was a tribulation-passing cultivator, what he left behind may not be better than Do Shanjuan's. Therefore, I don't need to think too much about Mo Yun Tong. My target is the jade bottle. Then, there's this spiritual intelligence. This thing is not necessary to cultivate a scattered soul, but it's the key to it. With this thing, the scattered soul, whether it's spiritual sense or spiritual body, can be close to the physical body. As for what it will achieve in the end, the Mo Yun Tong didn't record it. However, since I want to do it, I'll do it to the best of my ability. After making up his mind, Xiao Hua opened his mouth and spat out a dual-colored spiritual fire. Under Xiao Hua's careful control of the divine fire art, it turned into countless fire threads and entangled the spiritual intelligence restriction. Sure enough, the spiritual fire threads were so gentle that they didn't have any spiritual power. When they fell on the restriction, there was no attack. Xiao Hua was overjoyed and used all his spiritual power to control the restriction. Although the spiritual fire was powerful enough and Xiao Hua's divine fire art was superb, this restriction was, after all, set by a tribulation-passing cultivator. Xiao Hua spent a full hour to break the restriction and put the spiritual intelligence back into the space. As the spiritual intelligence disappeared from the surface of the water, a layer of light ripples appeared on the surface of the water. These ripples were very strange. They actually moved inwards from the surface of the water to the jade case. The place where the ripples contracted was where the spiritual intelligence was. Good. Xiao Hua put away the spiritual intelligence and was overjoyed. He didn't dare to waste too much time and didn't look at anything else on the surface of the water. He hurriedly went to the jade case and opened his mouth to release another dual-colored spiritual fire. However, just as the fiery threads were about to reach the restriction on the jade bottle, Xiao Hua suddenly stopped and hesitated. My nascent soul is different from other nascent souls. The number of pills it consumes is also different. In particular, according to my Dao sect cultivation method, when an ordinary cultivator reaches the late stage of nascent soul, they have to imprint their primordial spirit into their nascent soul. It's the same as the sword cultivators of Xiaoyu continent controlling their flying swords. Because the nascent soul is a spiritual body, it is different from a life source magic treasure. When the primordial spirit imprint matures, that is, when the nascent soul cultivation method reaches large success, the cultivator needs to cut off the connection between the main body's primordial spirit and the nascent soul. This way, the nascent soul can freely leave the cultivator's main body. This is the so-called leaving the body. When the nascent soul matures again, it can independently roam the sky. Especially when the cultivator's primordial spirit reaches small success, they can use a secret technique to split their soul from 100 li or 1,000 li away. This is called soul splitting. Chapter 37-36. However, I'm different from others. The nascent soul in my body is not only formless, but my primordial spirit is already complete. If I leave a primordial spirit imprint in the nascent soul according to the cultivation method, I can't guarantee that the imprint will form a complete primordial spirit. Even if it succeeds, why would I not use the green robe Xiaohua and use a primordial spirit that needs to be cultivated? If that's the case, my path is different from Senior Zonglongzi's, or even Do Shanjuan's. I'm afraid Senior Zonglongzi's elixir won't be of any use. Also, my alchemy skills are not inferior to anyone else. As long as I have enough spiritual herbs, I can even refine a third-grade elixir. Why should I bother with elixirs? This Xiao should focus on the cultivation technique. Xiaohua had already thought it through. Now that I want to create my own cultivation method, the more techniques I need, the better. Senior Zonglongzi's cultivation method may not be as good as Do Shanjuan's, but I can use other techniques. That's right, I'll use this ink cloud pupil. Xiaohua finished thinking for a moment and waved his hands. A wisp of spiritual fire landed on the restriction on the ink cloud pupil. This time, it took twice as long as the previous time. Perhaps the restriction was different, or the power of the spiritual fire was not as strong as the previous time. Xiaohua took out the ink cloud pupil after 2 hours. When Xiaohua touched the ink cloud pupil, a layer of strange cloud patterns appeared on a stone wall in the distance. The cloud patterns moved like a vivid painting and a thumb-sized human figure flew out from the cloud patterns. As it flew out, the human figure became bigger and bigger. In the blink of an eye, the human figure turned into the cultivator Xiaohua saw earlier with about the 3rd grade of essence force. The cultivator's face was filled with excitement and his eyes were tightly shut. He did not open his eyes at all in the cave. He casually sat down cross-legged and meditated like Xue Ping and the rest. It's really the same destination. Xiaohua calmed down and confirmed that this was the real abode where Zonglongzi cultivated. He then turned around and placed the ink cloud pupil on his forehead. Ah! When he saw the records in the ink cloud pupil, Xiaohua could not help but exclaim. His voice was filled with ecstasy and disbelief. How is this possible? Is this the complete fire escape, wood escape, and earth escape techniques? After Xiaohua cried out in alarm, he couldn't help but take a closer look. He completely ignored the other cultivators that had fallen into the stone wall like dumplings. After carefully reading the ink cloud pupil, Xiaohua's heart was completely at ease. This ink cloud pupil not only recorded the cultivation methods of fire escape, wood escape and earth escape, but also recorded some strange escape methods and secret skills, and even many pill recipes. Although Xiaohua's wood escape, earth escape, and fire escape were different from these basic escape techniques, it was clear that they were all of the same origin. Only the details were slightly different. Alas, if I had known that Senior Zonglongzi's cave mansion had these escape techniques, I wouldn't have spent so much effort to find them elsewhere. Xiaohua took back the ink cloud pupil and handed it to Xiaohua in the green robe. Yes, the things left behind in the cave mansion of the ancient Taoist cultivators were all rare. No wonder so many cultivators searched all over the world for this cloud mountain maze formation. If this cave mansion could not be moved, it would have been found in Yongzhou Cloud Mountain long ago. What a pity! Xiaohua looked at the other 2 restrictions again. He knew that the spiritual power in his body could no longer break any of these 2 restrictions. He felt quite regretful. He really wanted to know whether the one in the middle was a spiritual treasure or a spiritual weapon. Taoist Xiao? You're really fast. Suddenly, a slightly surprised voice came from another stone wall. The same cloud pattern emerged and Gusu Chodi's figure flew out from it. However, Gusu Chodi's situation was somewhat similar to Xiao Hua's. Although she was very excited, her eyes were not closed. Haha, Xiao Hua turned around and laughed. Chodi didn't take too long. I just came in. Swish swish. As he spoke, another cloud pattern appeared on the stone wall again. A disciple of Zhang Daoran flew out from it. Looks like everyone went smoothly. Gusu Chodi smiled and flew toward Xiao Hua. Chodi. Xiao Hua hurriedly reminded, don't use any spells. Oh, don't use any spiritual energy. There are restrictions all around. Is that so? Gusu Chodi's eyes flashed with a clear light as if she was looking around. Unfortunately, after looking for a while, she only saw stalactites and stalactites. She did not see any special restrictions. This is Northern Underworld breathwater? Gusu Chodi's gaze fell on the pool and immediately cried out in surprise. Xiao Hua touched his nose and smiled bitterly. Yes, how could a pool that could give birth to spiritual intelligence be an ordinary pool? Xiao Hua used his spiritual eyes to see that the pool was extraordinary. However, he did not have any thoughts of collecting it because the restrictions in this cave mansion were really too powerful. But Gusu Chodi was different. She reached out and the imperial copper cup immediately appeared in her hand. She activated her spiritual energy and was about to collect the so-called Northern Underworld breathwater. Chodi, be careful. Xiao Hua could only remind her again, hoping that the lightning that he could not resist would not cause too much damage to Gusu Chodi. Unfortunately, this time Xiao Hua's eyes fell out again. The pool water followed the suction force into the copper cup and did not produce any lightning. Oh, I understand. In an instant, the embarrassed Xiao Hua immediately thought of the ripple when he collected the spiritual intelligence. Then Xiao Hua smiled and said, Chodi, I'll give you half a cup of tea's time. I'll take the rest of the Northern Underworld breathwater. Okay. Gusu Chodi's copper cup did not look like an imperial tool that specialized in collecting water. However, it was already filled with a lot of water in a moment. Gusu Chodi thought about it and immediately agreed. Sister Chodi. While they were talking, Gong Shu Isin also flew out from the stone wall. When she saw such a huge cave mansion, she immediately shouted happily, Look, it's not out of little sister's expectations. Behind that huge stone array must be Tsong Lang Zi's cave mansion. Is this Lang Lin stone? It's the one used to refine the array diagram. Gong Shu Isin did not fly up. Her eyes only swept around and landed on a place not far from the stone wall. She cried out in surprise and flew over. Damn it, I miscalculated. Xiao Hua secretly stomped his feet. He first looked at the stalactites, then he saw the jade table and the pool of water. Although he used his divine sense to scan the area, he didn't look carefully. He didn't expect that this cave was full of treasures. If I knew this, I would have cleaned everything and not left a single stone for them. The stingy Xiao Hua regretted it very much. Who is this? At the stone wall where Zhang Daoran was, the second person to fly in was a nascent soul cultivator. However, when Xiao Hua's divine sense swept over, he was a bit surprised because this cultivator was very unfamiliar and was not someone he knew. Looking at Gusu Chodi, who was concentrating on collecting the Northern Underworld breathwater, and Gong Shu Isin, who was collecting the Lang Lin stone, Xiao Hua hurriedly transmitted a message to the two. The two were also surprised and hurriedly looked up. However, they saw the nascent soul cultivator sitting cross-legged and ignoring Chodi. They looked at each other and transmitted a message. Taoist Master Xiao, carefully monitor this person. If there are any strange movements, then make a move. If there is no accident, it should be because we caused too much of a commotion when breaking the array. The nearby cultivators were attracted and then entered the misty mountain maze to meet Zhang Daoran and the others. Xiao Hua's heart jumped. He immediately thought of Fairy Su Ming and vigilantly looked at the cultivator. Gusu Chodi and Gong Shu Isin left Xiao Hua and hurriedly went to collect their treasures. After half a cup of tea, the cultivator did not move. Xiao Hua smiled and said, Fairy Chodi, it's my turn. All right. Gusu Chodi took a deep breath and put away the imperial cup. Her gaze fell on the plan behind Xiao Hua. However, when Xiao Hua's figure flew up and took out the clear water bottle, she shifted her gaze away from the jade table. What a joke. Even with Xiao Hua's divine ability, he could not collect it. Naturally, She would have to use her true qi. Rather than that, she might as well see if there were any other treasures in the cave. Seeing Gusu Chodi fly to other places in the cave, Xiaohua smiled bitterly. People were really different. Greed was also different. Others only knew how to go to other places to look. He, on the other hand, fought with the restrictions right from the start. He took the most difficult ones first and left the rest of the treasures that he obtained effortlessly for others. However, Xiaohua did not have the time to look at other things. He pretended to take out the clear water bottle, but his mind had already sent a large amount of northern underworld breath water into his space. It was still beyond Xiaohua's expectations. No matter how much northern underworld breath water he collected, the pool of water did not decrease at all. Instead, when ripples appeared, there was still some surplus. Taoist Master Xiao? What treasure is this? Xianxia also flew out. His face was flushed, and starlight flickered around him. Obviously, he also obtained many benefits inside the stone wall. Northern underworld breath water. Do you want it? Xiaohua replied with a smile. Yes. Xianxia answered without hesitation. He reached out to take out the artifact. At this time, Gusu Chodi coquettishly scolded in the distance. Xianxia, don't listen to the spiritual master's nonsense. I have already collected it. Go look elsewhere. Senior Tsonglang Zi's cave really has too many treasures. Hee hee. Xianxia rolled his eyes at Xiaohua. He chuckled and also released his divine sense. Damn, I thought I was here first. I didn't expect you all to be here. Sun Kong Shangren also flew in at this time. However, he only closed his eyes for a few breaths. He immediately flew up and shouted, Brother Xiao, this jade table. Without waiting for Sun Kong Shangren to finish, Xiaohua immediately interrupted. That is the most difficult one. Wait until the end. Sun Kong Shangren was even more cunning. He already understood Xiaohua's meaning. He swept with his divine sense and quickly flew to another place. Chapter 37:37. Xiaohua collected the northern underworld breath while paying attention to the stone wall in Zhang Daren's direction. At this time, Zhang Daren's disciples and a few cultivators with Xue Ping also came out from the stone wall. There were even 3 nascent soul cultivators that Xiaohua didn't recognize, but Zhang Daoran still didn't appear. Xiaohua frowned. Swoosh! Another cloud pattern surged and a nascent soul cultivator flew in. This cultivator had a strong build, fair skin, and somewhat thick eyebrows. This cultivator, like the other 3 nascent soul cultivators, didn't open his eyes. He also chose a place to sit cross-legged and comprehend, but didn't see any abnormalities. Strange, there are also 4. No, there's also one more low-level cultivator. Xiaohua looked at the cultivators below the stone wall in surprise. Could it be that these 4 nascent soul cultivators have the same purpose as Fairy Su Ming? I killed Reverend Chu Feng and Reverend Xiangtian at the Yaotai conference. Reverend Yuan Qing already said that he would spread the news of their deaths. Fairy Shuming avenged Reverend Chu Feng, so the one who avenged Reverend Xiangtian was naturally Fairy Xiangfeng, right? However, it seems that there are no female cultivators among these 4 nascent soul cultivators. Oh, perhaps. When Xiaohua saw the unfamiliar low-level cultivator, he somewhat understood. These 4 nascent soul cultivators might have been invited by this cultivator. However, no matter what, I have to be careful. However, at this time, rumble! A huge tremor came from all sides of the Immortal's cave. The entire cave was shaking. Xiaohua watched as the pool water, which hadn't decreased at all just a moment ago, disappeared in an instant. Brother Xiao? What's going on? Amidst the rumbling, Zhang Daoran flew out from the cloud pattern on the stone wall. When he saw the entire cave shaking, he couldn't help but feel strange. Without waiting for Xiaohua to speak, a roar that sounded like a dragon's roar resounded, and the figures of 4 demonic beasts appeared beside the stone wall where the 4 cultivators came from. At the same time, the entire stone wall cracked open, revealing a beast-shaped cave. The entrance to the cave was pitch black, and it emitted a cold aura. Xiaohua felt strange. Is this the exit of the cave? While thinking, Xiaohua put away the water bottle. Although the pond water was gone, Xiaohua took advantage of this time to collect a lot of northern underworld breathwater. After instructing Xiao Gua to implant the northern underworld breathwater into the northern underworld breathwater, Xiaohua used his spiritual force to scan the 4 caves separately. That's not right. Why do these 4 holes have the same aura as the previous maze? Xiaohua frowned. Suddenly, an unimaginable thought emerged from the bottom of his heart. Without waiting for him to speak, Gongshu Exen in the distance exclaimed in joy. I understand. This wasn't Senior Tsong Langzi's cave abode. This was just a place where he rested, or rather, his front residence. When the old man left, he set up a part of the maze. This misty mountain maze formation has more than 1 layer. Who cares if it's the first floor? With a sweep of his divine sense, Xiaohua collected the few jade crystals at the bottom of the lake, as well as a few array discs and other objects into his space. Then, he turned his gaze to other places. Senior. Fu Jiwen flew over and bowed. Senior. Don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and find treasures. Xiaohua didn't allow him to finish his words. He hurriedly shouted, no matter what it is, as long as you can take it first. Yes, master. Fu Jiwen hurriedly called out his master and immediately flew off. Seeing Xiaohua like this, Zhang Daoren simply didn't ask any more questions. He hurriedly released his divine sense and began to search around. Fu Jiwen came in first. Moreover, he had only completed the wordless heavenly book, so he woke up faster than the others. The other Dao sect disciples weren't as lucky as him. After all the nascent soul cultivators opened their eyes and began to search the cave abode, they woke up one by one. Of course, these cultivators also hurriedly got up, very familiar with avoiding the nascent soul cultivators and looking for their own treasures. In just less than half an hour, the entire cave abode, except for the 2 restrictions on the jade table, was as clean as a dog licking the jade table. The low-level disciples were still searching around to see if they had left anything behind. The nascent soul cultivators naturally had to worry about their face, so they all landed beside the jade table. Xiaohua looked at the unfamiliar nascent soul cultivators and said with a smile, Brother Daoran, what's going on with these fellow Taoists? Hee, it's all a coincidence. Zhang Daoran smiled and pointed at the nascent soul cultivator who flew out earlier. This is Taoist Master Di Quan. He and Taoist Cheng are friends despite the difference in age. Taoist Cheng didn't believe that Brother Xiao could break the formation, so he went to find fellow Taoist Master Di Quan. Fellow Taoist Master Di Quan invited Taoist Master Han, Yi Mingzi, and Yun Mingzi over. When they arrived, the outer formation had already been broken by us. Of course, they also thought of it and hurriedly entered a cave. They thought that they could meet Brother Xiao inside the cave, but who knew that they would meet this old man? Since they were Dao sect disciples, this old man also came in with them. During this period, we encountered many traps. The 4 fellow Taoists also put in a lot of effort to protect this old man's disciples. Brother Daoran is really lucky. Master Sun Kong smiled bitterly. If this old man met the 4 fellow Taoists, this old man's 2 disciples wouldn't have fallen in the maze. That's true. Zhang Daoran nodded. This old man has 5 nascent soul cultivators here. Fellow Taoist Master Zhai Xing has 3. Although Brother Xiao is alone, his cultivation far surpasses ours. You are alone and can't do anything alone. The key is that this ancient maze is too powerful. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, even the few juniors with this Xiao suffered no small amount of damage. Zhang Daoran smiled and looked at the cave in the shape of a beast on the stone wall. He pointed at it and said, these 4 entrances are the entrances to the 2nd layer of the maze. Presumably, it's even more dangerous inside. Since we are already here, we have no choice but to continue forward. This 2nd layer of the maze, we have to carefully ponder over it. Brother Daoran. At this time, Taoist Master Di Quan smiled and pointed at the jade table. Let's first discuss how to break these 2 treasures. I am already somewhat afraid of such a dangerous maze. Moreover, when I passed through the stone wall just now, I gained something. It's very useful for Ai's cultivation. If these treasures are lucky enough to fall into Ai's hands, I don't intend to go to the 2nd layer of the maze. Yun Mengzi's expression changed slightly and he said with displeasure, Fellow Taoist Master Di Quan, This is not what we discussed before. If you give up halfway, what should we do? Haha. Taoist Master Di Quan laughed and covered up. Just now at the stone wall, old friend Yun Mengzi must have gained something. This is an opportunity. We haven't had such an opportunity for hundreds of years. Now that we have encountered it, why not cherish it? When Yun Mengzi still wanted to say something, Gong Shu Xian stepped forward and said, since we want to break the maze, we naturally have to follow the rules. On this jade table, there should be 3 treasures just by looking at the positions. Now there were only 2. The one on the edge must have been taken away by someone. How should we distribute the remaining 2? Gong Shu Xian interrupted Yun Mengzi and Taoist Master Di Quan. It was rather reckless, but he didn't miss the opportunity. Taoist Master Di Quan hurriedly said, I and the others came later. We still want to hear Brother Darren's opinion. Then, how about we make a decision again? When Taoist Master Di Quan was speaking, Gong Shu Xian intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua was very helpless. He touched his nose and thought to himself. Gong Shu Xian was obviously warning him not to reach out again. Next to him, Gusu Chodi smiled and shook her head. When she came in, Xiao Hua was standing in front of the jade table and also warned her that the maze inside the cave was powerful. He must have suffered on the jade table. The treasure Gong Shu Xian mentioned was secondary. The most important thing was that if the maze was not powerful, Xiao Hua would have already taken it away. Why wait until now? Since Xiao Hua couldn't take it away, it was unlikely that they and the others could either. Gong Shu Xian's warning was really like taking off pants to fart. Sure enough, Zhang Daoren said, if this was an ordinary matter, we would follow the rules and see who breaks the maze first. But this is the place where Senior Tsang Longzi meditates. The maze inside must be incomparably overbearing. We don't follow the rules. It belongs to whoever can take it. Furthermore, I would like to remind all of you, fellow Taoists, that no matter who makes a move or who obtains it, the other fellow Taoists are not allowed to attack. Otherwise this old man will kill without mercy. Taoist Master Di Quan's heart chilled, but he was even more pleasantly surprised. After all, he had seen clearly that dealing with 5 cultivators above the 4th level was one more than him. Moreover, Master Sun Kong and Zhang Daren's spiritual power fluctuations were obscure. They seemed to be on the verge of a breakthrough. Although Zhai Xingzi and Xiao Hua couldn't see clearly, since Xiao Hua could kill Taoist Master Xiangtian, his means must not be weak. In this way, he and the others were clearly at a disadvantage. Zhang Daren's rules were absolutely beneficial to them. Thus, Taoist Master Di Quan cupped his hands and said, many thanks for Taoist Master Di Ran's righteousness. Then please make the first move. Zhang Daoran was about to speak when Xiao Hua's voice sounded in his ear. After a moment, he smiled and said, how about this, let's discuss first. It won't be too late to talk later. We will listen to Taoist Master Di Ran's orders. Taoist Master Di Quan smiled. Taoist Master Han and Yi Mingzi walked over naturally. Yun Mengzi pondered for a moment and could only come over. The 7 4th grade Essence Force cultivators were divided into 2 groups as they discussed in low voices. The other cultivators stood quietly in the surroundings. Xue Ping's gaze was fixed on Dao Cheng, who was standing with the other cultivators in the distance. Dao Cheng's expression changed slightly. Taoist Dao. Xue Ping thought of Li Xiu and the others and Fairy Su Ming's craziness. His heart tightened and he asked, what's going on with these 4 seniors? Chapter 37-38. Dao Cheng might not have expected such a situation, but he was naturally able to deal with Xue Ping's words. Moreover, Xue Ping did not know who Xiao Hua's enemy was. The 2 of them talked for a while, and Dao Cheng's answer was watertight. Xue Ping did not ask anything, and Dao Cheng would definitely not reveal the fact that Fairy Xiang Feng had disguised herself as Yun Mengzi. The discussion between the Dao sect's elders ended very quickly. Zhang Daoran was the first to speak. Fellow Taoist Di Quan, this old man feels that the restrictions on these 2 treasures are definitely not small matters, so this old man's first suggestion is, we should break the restrictions together. Ha! Taoist Master Di Quan was stunned. Zhang Daren's suggestion was truly out of his expectations. After looking around at Taoist Master Han and the others, he turned his head and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Dao Ran's suggestion is excellent. However, there are only 2 treasures on this jade case. There are so many of us, I'm afraid it won't be easy to distribute them. It's better to go our own way." Taoist Master Di Quan's words were very obvious. They were afraid of giving Zhang Daoran and the others a wedding dress. Zhang Daoran was not surprised and said with a smile, "Since that's the case, the 4 of you should make a move first. The 4 of you can freely choose between these 2 restrictions. However, regardless of whether you succeed or fail, this old man will have to make a move." All right. Of course, Taoist Master Di Quan and the others were surprised, but since it was given to them, it was impossible for them not to take advantage of it. However, just as Taoist Master Di Quan and Taoist Master Han were about to move, Yun Mengzi suddenly called out to them via sound transmission. This was because the attentive Yun Mengzi had already heard something from Zhang Daoran's words. Taoist Master Di Quan and the other 3 discussed via sound transmission for a moment before walking to the side of the restriction where the jade bottle was located. However, when the 4 of them gathered, Yun Mengzi hesitated for a moment. However, this hesitation only lasted for a moment before Yun Mengzi returned to normal. Fellow Taoists. Seeing that the 4 of them had already stood in 4 corners, Xiaohua opened his mouth and said, "This old man has to remind you that the restrictions on this jade case are no small matter, and the power of the counterattack is great. You can't hold back, but you must also prevent yourselves from getting injured." "Thank you, Taoist Master Xiao." Taoist Master Di Quan raised his brows and a trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. He looked at Xiaohua with some gratitude and then intentionally or unintentionally looked at Yun Mingzi and said, "Fellow Taoists, did you hear? You and I must act according to our capabilities." "Yes, thank you for your reminder, Spiritual Master Xiao." It seemed that aside from Yun Mingzi, the other 2 all spoke. As for Yun Mingzi, he was slightly stunned, then he smiled and said, "Spiritual Master Xiao is truly kind. We have no choice but to thank you." Xiaohua smiled faintly but didn't say anything. He thought that Yun Mingzi had misunderstood and was mocking him for reminding Zhang Daoran of the power of the restriction first. So Zhang Daoran had Taoist Master Di Quan and the others test it first. Taoist Master Di Quan and the others stood still and looked at each other. They each slapped their hands on the top of the door, and 4 streaks of light shot into the sky. 4 small nascent souls in spirit armor appeared in the air. The 4 nascent souls were similar in size, and although the lights flashing around them were different, their magic power fluctuations were similar. However, when they summoned their magic treasures, their power was different. Taoist Master Di Quan had a silver spear that was more than a foot long, engraved with many flowing talismans. Under the activation of the nascent soul, the talismans emitted a dazzling brilliance. The brilliance was like a wave of water drifting between the silver spear and the nascent soul, and an incomparably sharp aura was born from the nascent soul. Taoist Master Han held a light flying sword in his hand. The flying sword was like a thin thread, and thousands of willow catkins fluttered in the air, either hiding in the void or falling into the nascent soul. Although this flying sword wasn't as sharp as Taoist Master Di Quan's silver spear, the cracks in the void created by the flying sword were enough to make Zhang Daoran and the others' eyes light up. Yi Mingzi held a pearl in her hand. There was a faint shadow of a strange beast inside the pearl. When Yi Mingzi's nascent soul activated it, the strange beast came out of the pearl. This strange beast looked like a dragon, but it wasn't. A strange and violent aura instantly filled the entire cave. Although the strange beast hadn't truly transformed, its thunderous roars were incessant. Yun Mengzi held a chipped disc in her hand. The brilliance on it was restrained, but the edges revealed teeth. Clusters of tiny light rays spurted out from the teeth. Although it wasn't completely activated, the origin chi of heaven and earth surged out from the left side of the disc, and the light rays of the disc fiercely shrank and contracted. Seeing that the 4 nascent souls of the 4 cultivators were all male, Xiaohua's heart finally relaxed. It seemed that he was really paranoid. The so-called fairy Xiangfeng didn't come here by coincidence. Fellow Taoists, attack! Taoist Master Di Quan lightly reprimanded, and the silver spear in his hand turned into a silver bolt of lightning that pierced towards the side of the jade bottle. The lightning was dazzling, and the group of low-level disciples couldn't help but close their eyes. Within the light, Taoist Han's flying cotton seemed to be blown by the wind and was even more invisible. It also landed on the restriction. Roar! Mingzi activated her true essence. The strange beast that had been circling around the pearl let out a long roar and turned into the thickness of an arm before charging towards the restriction. The strange beast's scales were exceptionally clear, and strange runes faintly appeared within them. A fist-sized horn grew increasingly larger as it approached the restriction. Mingzi's nascent soul didn't grasp the timing to swing the disc well. It seemed to hesitate slightly, or perhaps the direction was inaccurate. However, the light that was leaning towards Xiaohua distorted and immediately followed the other three's magic treasures to attack the restriction. It was only because of Mingzi's momentary hesitation, but the sound of thunder once again filled the jade table. The three magic treasures that stabbed into the restriction were immediately entangled by hair-thin thunderbolts. Ka-ka-ka-ka, sounds like glass cracking. Twisted cracks appeared on the silver spear and the silver light dimmed. Mingzi's strange beast was even more pitiful. With a whoosh, all the scales on its body were lifted by the thunderbolts and layers of blood-red runes flowed out like blood. On the other hand, the unknown Taoist Master Han, following the thunderbolts, the sword threads turned into thin green threads, dodging most of the thunderbolts. Very few thunderbolts landed on the sword threads, only trembling slightly a few times before gradually disappearing. It was very clear that Taoist Master Han's flying sword was a rare wood attribute. Puff puff. With two muffled sounds, Taoist Master Di Quan and Mingzi's nascent souls opened their mouths and coughed out half a mouthful of blood. Their nascent souls were already dispirited. Sizzle. Seeing this, Mingzi was shocked and hurriedly took back the disc. Just as the disc stopped, there was another light, gotcha sound. A thin lightning bolt hit the edge of the disc at lightning speed. A small crack appeared on the disc after being hit by the lightning bolt. In the blink of an eye, the disc fell into the nascent soul's hands. The nascent soul didn't stop and entered Mingzi's body. Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and smiled meaningfully. Fellow Taoist Mingzi actually listened to my advice. The other fellow Taoists don't seem to care. Taoist Master Di Quan and Mingzi's faces were slightly red. They withdrew their nascent souls and looked at each other before looking at Taoist Han. Although Taoist Han wasn't injured and his magic treasure wasn't damaged, it was even more impossible for him to break the restriction. Therefore, Taoist Han smiled bitterly and withdrew his nascent soul and magic treasure. He said to Zhang Daoran, "Fellow Taoist Daoran, it seems that we have no fate with this spirit pill. Now it's your turn to make a move. We will rest on the side for the time being." "All right." Zhang Daoran nodded. "After this old man and the others make a move, regardless of whether it succeeds or not, the four of you will make a move again. Let's do as fellow Taoist Daoran says." Taoist Han nodded and flew to the side. He frowned as he looked at the jade table and pondered. Taoist Master Di Quan and Mingzi flew to the side and took medicinal pills to heal their injuries. As for Mingzi, she looked at Xiaohua and the others with a slightly gloomy face. The so-called Mingzi was of course Fairy Xiangfeng. The reason for her hesitation was of course Xiaohua. After all, Xiaohua was close at hand and unguarded. As long as she activated her magic treasure, it was very likely that she could kill Xiaohua on the spot. Unfortunately, when Fairy Xiangfeng sent a sound transmission to Taoist Master Di Quan and the others to discuss, the three of them did not agree. Not to mention the treasure, the three of them had already set their eyes on the jade bottle. Just the presence of Zhai Xingzi and the other four was enough to deter the three of them, making them not dare to make a move. The moment Fairy Xiangfeng activated her magic treasure, she saw the beast-shaped black hole in Xiaohua's direction from the corner of her eyes. Only then did she put away her magic treasure and continue to attack the restriction. Of course, it was only when she was hesitating that the counterattack of the restriction did not severely injure Fairy Xiangfeng. At this moment, seeing Zhang Daoran discussing with Xiaohua via sound transmission, Fairy Xiangfeng couldn't help but feel lucky. Zhang Daoran asked Xiaohua via sound transmission, "Brother Xiao, this restriction is indeed as powerful as you said. Taoist Master Di Quan and the others. They didn't listen to your suggestion and made a move themselves. As expected, they suffered a huge loss. What do you think we should do now?" "What do you think, Brother Daoran?" Xiaohua did not directly answer, but instead asked a question. "This." Zhang Daoran pondered for a moment and smiled bitterly. "To be honest, although our cultivation is deeper than Taoist Master Di Quan's, the difference is negligible. If they can't break the restriction, we can't break it either. This old man wants to see what Brother Xiao can do. A smile appeared on Zhang Daren's face as he looked at the empty space on the jade table where Mo Yuntong had been placed. Xiao Hua shrugged and said with a smile, "If I had a way, would I have waited until now?" "Oh." Zhang Daoran was somewhat stunned. "Just now? Didn't we discuss in vain?" "Haha. How could it be for nothing?" Xiao Hua said with a smile. "If it was for nothing, why would I discuss with you?" Zhang Daoran scratched his head and said with a bitter smile, "Brother Xiao, just now when we were discussing how to break the restriction, you didn't mention making a move yourself. I thought you had the confidence to break the restriction at the crucial moment, but if you don't make a move now, with how powerful this restriction is, I'm afraid we won't even be able to touch a hair of it." Chapter 37-39. Xiao Hua touched his nose and smiled. "Just because I don't make a move doesn't mean others won't make a move." Who else can make a move?" Zhang Daoran was puzzled as he looked at Fu Jiwen, Shui Ping, and the others in the distance. Xianxia didn't disturb them. When Zhang Daoran looked at Fu Jiwen and Shui Ping, he immediately observed their expressions and smiled. "Fu Jiwen, come over here." "Yes, senior." Fu Jiwen was startled and flew over. Zhang Daoran stopped transmitting and looked at Fu Jiwen, asking curiously, "Brother Xiao, you said it was Fu Jiwen who made a move?" "Of course it's him. Who else could it be?" Xiao Hua said with a smile. Xiao Hua's stingy and protective nature was revealed again. Although he couldn't make a move now, he still didn't forget to pull his disciple into the group. If he had directly asked Fu Jiwen to make a move, Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong might have objected. But now, even if they wanted to object, looking at the injuries of Taoist Master Di Quan and the others, they naturally felt that Fu Jiwen was qualified to get a share of the loot. They couldn't help but mutter in their hearts. Since they didn't say anything, with Fu Jiwen's seniority, no matter if he got a magic treasure or elixir, others wouldn't treat him badly. Sure enough, Sun Kong frowned and said with some displeasure, "Brother Xiao is joking, right? What can Fu Jiwen do?" "Gidge." Gusu Qiudi also understood Xiao Hua's thoughts and covered her mouth with a smile. "Taoist Master Xiao, you're really Gu Clan." "The men of Gu Clan are all good men." Xiao Hua said with a smile. "You female cultivators must cherish them." "That's..." Gusu Qiudi looked sweetly at Xianxia and said, "This concubine understands better than anyone." "What can this brat do?" Gong Shu Isin also asked coldly. Fu Jiwen naturally understood what Xiao Hua was thinking. He stood there quietly and didn't say anything. Xiao Hua ordered indifferently, "Fu Jiwen, take out the thunder amplification wood." "Yes, senior." Seeing that there were outsiders, Fu Jiwen immediately changed the way he addressed Xiao Hua and took out the wooden box made from the thunder amplification wood. "How's the time?" Xiao Hua seemed to have a plan and asked with a smile. If nothing unexpected happens, there should still be a few more moments. Fu Jiwen replied respectfully. "N." Xiao Hua nodded. "Then let's wait a little longer." Taoist Master Xiao. Xianxia sighed helplessly. "If the pills are taken out, how are we going to distribute them? You've given us a huge problem." "Brother Xianxing." Hearing Xianxia's confident tone, Zhang Daoran asked in bewilderment, "Can't we just go with what we discussed earlier?" "What do you mean by that?" "Right, let's do as Brother Daoran said." Xiao Hua smiled and said, "Fu Jiwen is a junior, so he should have the awareness of a junior. Don't you agree, Fu Jiwen?" "Yes, I will listen to your instructions." Fu Jiwen was even more cooperative than Xianxia. Xianxia looked at Gusu Qiudi helplessly and shook his head. "Qiu'er, this time, we are basking in Fu Jiwen's glory. Let's bask in it. In the past, this concubine also basked in it a lot. In the future, this concubine will probably bask in it as well." Gusu Qiudi smiled like a little fox. "At worst, we'll just give Fu Jiwen some more benefits." "Sister." Gong Shu Isin was unhappy and said loudly, "What do you mean? Can Fu Jiwen break the restriction?" "If Taoist Master Xiao says he can, then he can." Gusu Qiudi also started to keep them in suspense. Sun Kong seemed to have realized something and looked at Fu Jiwen up and down. However, Zhang Daoran was still not at ease. He smiled and said, Since Fu Jiwen is going to help Taoist Master Xiao break the restriction, then, how are we going to cooperate with Fu Jiwen? Xiao Hua shook his head mysteriously and said, "What Brother Dao Ran wants to do is indeed very important, because you have to choose which restriction to break first." Even though Zhang Daoran was half a step into the out-of-aperture realm, he did not have the slightest confidence in breaking the restriction. Now that he heard Xiao Hua's tone, it was as if the treasure in the restriction was in his hands. He could not help but be shocked. Hee. Seeing that he had enough of showing off, Xiao Hua's expression became serious. He coughed and said, "Fellow Taoists, let's follow our previous discussion and stand still." "All right." Gusu Chodi was the first to agree. She pulled Zhai Xingzi to stand at a corner of the jade table. However, Gusu Chodi did not take out any imperial equipment, while Zhai Xingzi took out Falling Star. Of course, what puzzled Taoist Master Di Quan and the others was that Zhai Xingzi did not use his nascent soul. Since Zhai Xingzi moved, although Sun Kong and Zhang Daoran were puzzled, they also took out their magic weapons and stood in front of the jade table. Seeing that Gusu Chodi did not take out her imperial equipment, Gong Shu Isin was a bit hesitant. She did not know if she should take out her imperial equipment like what they discussed before. Seeing this, Gusu Chodi smiled and said, "These are all Taoist treasures. You and I have no use for them. We can help. However, Zhai Xingzi and the others want to take the pills first. We don't have to interfere." "All right." Gong Shu Isin was also full of doubts and stood beside Gusu Chodi. "Senior Xiao, it's time," Fu Jiwen reminded in a low voice. "Do it." Xiao Hua nodded. Fu Jiwen received Xiao Hua's order and carefully opened the Yanlei wooden box in his hand. The Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal was revealed in mid-air. Heaven Punishment Prison. Gong Shu Isin was from a famous sect and recognized the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal at a glance. She could not help but call out. However, after calling out 3 words, she immediately felt something was wrong and quickly shut her mouth. Her gaze looked very frantically at Xiao Hua and then at Gusu Chodi. She really did not think that Gusu Chodi and Xiao Hua actually had something to do with the Immortal Palace's Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal. This was a great crime against the immortal law. Carefully place it above the restriction, Xiao Hua instructed in a low voice. "Yes, senior." A kind of warmth appeared in Fu Jiwen's eyes. He slowly placed the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal 1 Qi above the restriction. "Slowly descend," Xiao Hua instructed again. "Yes, senior." Fu Jiwen still complied. As the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal slowly approached the restriction, the hearts of Zhang Daoran and the others were all in suspense. "Hold on tight. When it's about time, let go," Xiao Hua reminded Fu Jiwen. "Yes." Fu Jiwen stared closely at the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal. His fingers slowly loosened. Gotcha! Just as everyone was staring at the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal, several bolts of lightning suddenly appeared. They were like horned dragons that appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The moment these bolts of lightning appeared, they immediately attacked the Heaven's Punishment Prison Crystal from all directions. However, just before these thunderbolts appeared, Fu Jiwen's fingers loosened. The Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal landed on the restriction of the jade bottle. Although most of the thunderbolts landed on the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal, there were still some that affected the restriction. Rumble! The fine thunderbolts that had just injured the 2 nascent soul stage cultivators also flashed out from the restriction and struck the Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal. Wang! The Heaven Punishment Prison Crystal made a rumbling sound in the lightning threads. Inscribed chains floated and overflowed from the lightning threads. A kind of indescribable solemnity, a kind of orderly and irresistible feeling was born from these chains. Waves of purple thunderbolts followed these inscribed chains and landed on the restriction that dared to challenge them. Gotcha! Rumble! Endless rumbles sounded on the jade table. Not only were Zhang Daoran and Master Sun Kong dumbstruck, but even Taoist Master Di Quan and Taoist Master Han were dumbstruck. Even Fairy Xiang Feng, who originally wanted to take advantage of the chaos to sneak attack Xiao Hua, opened her mouth slightly and threw her plan aside. She blankly watched the entanglement and struggle between the Heaven Punishment Lightning of the Immortal Palace and the Heaven Punishment Lightning of the Dao Sex Tribulation Transcending Stage Cultivator. Xiao Hua was really a little proud. Song Longzi was a Tribulation Transcending Stage Cultivator, but he was much weaker than the Immortal Palace, let alone the heaven punishment lightning of the Immortal Palace. Seeing that the restriction on the jade bottle had become thin in a moment, if they didn't make a move, the jade bottle might be destroyed by the lightning of the battle between Confucianism and Taoism. Xiaohua had to remind them, "Hurry up." Zhang Daoran and the others only woke up at this time as if they had just woken up from a dream. They each urged their magic treasures to hit the restriction under the lightning. Boom! In a flash of brilliance, the three magic treasures hit the restriction with lightning speed. Whoosh! But just as the brilliance was born, Xiaohua waved his sleeve and used the heaven and earth sleeve technique more skillfully than anyone else. He forcibly grabbed the jade bottle in the restriction that had just cracked a little. However, before Master Sun Kong could frown, Xiaohua's hand flashed in front of Fu Jiwen's eyes like a dragonfly skimming the water. The jade bottle instantly fell into Fu Jiwen's hand before Fu Jiwen realized it. Even if Master Sun Kong wanted to say something, he was afraid that he couldn't. After all, Xiaohua and Fu Jiwen were master and disciple. Although Xiaohua himself said that he wouldn't snatch the jade bottle, it was reasonable for him to snatch it for Fu Jiwen. Especially, with Fu Jiwen's cultivation, he couldn't use these elixirs at all. Senior Xiao. At this time, Gong Shu Exin hurriedly called out, "Hurry up and put the heaven punishment prison crystal on another restriction." Unfortunately, Xiaohua rolled his eyes at her and said lightly, "If you have the ability, take it yourself." You. Gong Shu Exin was a little breathless with anger. Looking at the lightning above the heaven punishment prison crystal, she also realized that this was the heaven punishment prison crystal. The thunder of heaven punishment represented the wrath of heaven. How could an ordinary cultivator trigger it? But thinking of this, Gong Shu Exin couldn't help but look at Fu Jiwen again. Yes, this kind of lightning punishment. Why wasn't Fu Jiwen afraid? Seeing Xiaohua take the jade bottle so easily and she didn't even have the thought of making a move, Fairy Xiangfeng was really ashamed and angry. She couldn't help glaring at Immortal Di Quan, whose eyes had already fallen to the ground. When Immortal Di Quan noticed Fairy Xiangfeng's gaze, he unconsciously swallowed the saliva that almost flowed out. He looked at Immortal Han and Yi Mingzi with a bitter smile. He really regretted that he didn't agree with Zhang Daren's suggestion. Chapter 3740. Fu Jiwen, quickly let me see what kind of elixir is inside. Gusu Chodi smiled and stretched out her hand. Yes, senior. Fu Jiwen obediently raised his hand and the jade bottle flew into Gusu Chodi's hand. His gaze still fell on the heaven's punishment prison crystal. Although the thunderbolts on the restriction had already subsided and the lightning on the heaven's punishment prison crystal was now extremely weak due to breaking the restriction, Fu Jiwen's heart still clenched when he thought about how he didn't use the thunder-amplifying wood to block the lightning today. Damn it, why did I take in such a stupid disciple? Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry and scolded. What are you looking at? Wasn't the heaven's punishment prison crystal the same when I didn't give you the thunder-amplifying wood? Today, the heaven's punishment prison crystal has been worn down by the restriction lightning and doesn't have much power anymore. Don't worry. Yes, master. Fu Jiwen was a little absent-minded and answered, but his gaze didn't move away from the lightning. Brother Daoran, come and take a look. The jade bottle in Gusu Chodi's hand had already fallen into Zhai Xingzi's hand. After seeing it, Zhai Xingzi's face flushed red. He didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly beckoned Zhang Daoran over. How could Zhang Daoran not know the rarity of the elixir in the jade bottle? Looking at the heaven's punishment prison crystal that no longer had any lightning, he chuckled and didn't rush over. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the heaven's punishment prison crystal in his hand. His figure landed beside Fu Jiwen and placed the heaven's punishment prison crystal in the thunder-amplifying wood. He then said to Taoist Master Di Quan, Taoist Master Di Quan, according to our agreement, it's time for you to take action. After the four of you take action, if you succeed, we'll immediately enter the final maze. If you fail, hee. After saying that, Zhang Daoran used his hand to pull Fu Jiwen and said to Zhai Xingzi and the others, let's go over there and talk. Immediately after, Zhang Daoran and the others walked away with their heads held high. The seven of them gathered in a corner of the cave. After Zhang Daoran set up a restriction, they hid inside to discuss how to split the teams. Although Xue Ping and the others were a little jealous in their hearts, their jealousy varied from person to person. For example, Xue Ping immediately realized that Xiao Hua accepting Fu Jiwen as his disciple was not as simple as he had thought. When he thought about his encounter inside the stone wall, he had long since calmed down. Looking at the strange expressions on the faces of the people around him, he sighed in his heart and closed his eyes to comprehend. Taoist Master Di Quan and the others didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of the 4 nascent soul cultivators, 2 were injured, and 2 had suffered under the restriction. How could they still have the strength to break the restriction? Although Zhang Daren's words weren't sarcastic, there was a hint of mockery. However, the 4 of them exchanged glances. Their minds were already spinning as they pondered on how to break the seal. However, Fu Jiwen relied on the heavenly punishment prison crystal to break the restriction. This method couldn't be used casually. The 4 of them racked their brains but couldn't find a way to resist the restriction of a tribulation passing cultivator. Half an hour later, Zhang Daoran removed the restriction. Everyone, including Gongshu Exin, had a smile on their faces. Taoist Master Di Quan and the others felt even more bitter in their hearts. Obviously, a bottle of panacea refined by a tribulation-passing cultivator had been cleanly divided up by these shameful opponents. If they couldn't come up with something to break the restriction, they would lose the qualification to break the restriction. Of course, when Zhang Daoran and Taoist Master Di Quan discussed before, they didn't mention the time to break the restriction. However, Taoist Master Di Quan didn't think that the 4 of them had any qualifications to delay the time. Sure enough, without waiting for Zhang Daoran to speak, Sun Kong looked at the restriction on the jade table that hadn't moved in the slightest and said with a smile, "It seems that the 4 fellow Taoists are very polite. You had to wait for us to be present before breaking the restriction. In that case, I ask the 4 fellow Taoists to make a move. We've already discussed and prepared to wait for the 4 fellow Taoists to try before getting the last spirit channeling magic treasure." Spirit channeling magic treasure? Xiao Hua nodded slightly. He knew that on the hidden Immortal continent, spirit channeling magic treasures were spirit tools. Hearing Sun Kong's confident tone, Taoist Master Di Quan looked at Taoist Master Han and the others and asked helplessly, "What do you 3 fellow Taoists think?" This Taoist Master Han wasn't as depressed as Taoist Master Di Quan. He had been looking at the jade table with narrowed eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. Now that he heard Taoist Master Di Quan's question, he hesitated slightly and said, "Fellow Taoist Sun Kong, can you give us a bit more time?" Why not?" Sun Kong waved his sleeve and laughed loudly. "Then I'll give the 4 fellow Taoists 20 hours. After 20 hours, we'll make a move." "Many thanks, fellow Taoist." Taoist Master Han cupped his hands and replied. At this time, not to mention Taoist Master Han, even Xue Ping and the others knew that Fu Jiwen's heavenly punishment prison crystal would definitely produce heavenly punishment lightning again after 24 hours. Taoist Master Han. Seeing Taoist Master Han take the initiative to speak, Taoist Master Di Quan's eyes lit up and he asked tentatively, "You?" Taoist Master Han nodded slightly and took out a few formation plates. He formed hand seals and the formation plates landed on both sides of the jade table. The formation plates flickered with obscure fluctuations and enveloped the entire jade table in a moment. Then Taoist Master Han took out a few formation flags and rubbed them with his hands. Strands of strange brilliance fell into the formation flags. These formation flags floated and landed in the void above the jade table. When everything was ready, Taoist Master Han smiled and said, "Fellow Taoists, please come with me. I just saw Taoist Master Xiao break the formation. I have some insights." "Okay." Taoist Master Di Quan and the others were delighted. Only Fairy Xiang Feng was a bit hesitant, but she still flew with the 3. When Taoist Master Han set up a silent barrier, the 4 began to discuss. Lady Gongshu." Xiao Hua looked at the formation set up by Taoist Master Han and said with a smile, "How confident do you think Taoist Master Han is in breaking the restriction?" Gongshu Exin rolled her eyes at Xiao Hua and said coldly, "I should be the one asking Senior Xiao this question, right? Taoist Master Han is your Tao sect cultivator. You should know better than me." "I can't see it either." But it seems they came prepared. Xiao Hua touched his nose and completely erased the doubt in his heart. He shook his head and said, "Perhaps this Taoist Master Han is the instigator of entering the Cloud Mountain Maze formation." Yes, this Taoist Master Han knows formations. Moreover, His magic treasure is a wood attribute flying sword. Presumably, he has already thought of a way to restrain the restriction lightning. This Taoist Master Han is amazing. Gusu Chodi nodded and said. However, Zhang Daoran and Sun Kong were Zhai Xingzi. The three people's eyes revealed doubt. Sun Kong asked curiously, Brother Daoran, have you heard of this Taoist Master Han's name? No. Zhang Daoran replied flatly, I haven't even heard of that Yun Meng Zi. It's really strange. A Jade Pavilion gathering actually involved so many nascent soul cultivators of my hidden immortal continent. It's really out of my expectations. Zhai Xingzi was also stunned. He even looked at Xiao Hua. Let's not talk about others. With Taoist Master Zhao's cultivation, although I'm not close to you province, I haven't heard of any rumors. Am I a bit ignorant? Seeing everyone talking about his background again, Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand and said with a very mysterious smile, I'm not surnamed Gusu. Why do you know me? Besides, don't ask about a hero's origin. Miracles are naturally man-made. There are so many nameless great experts in this world. Who knows where a divine clone is hiding? Different. Zhang Daoran shook his head. Hidden immortal continent of Confucian cultivators. How can there be too many miracles? What about Grand Mist Ancestor? Xiao Hua hit the nail on the head. When these words came out, everyone was speechless. Their faces were filled with envy and reverence. Clearly, this Grand Mist Ancestor had long been a legend of the hidden immortal continent. Not long after, Taoist Master Han and the others had finished their discussion. Taoist Master Di Quan and Yi Mingzi's faces were filled with excitement. On the other hand, Fairy Xiang Feng was biting her lips with a helpless expression. Fellow Taoists, this time I am the abbot of breaking the seal. According to our previous discussion, I ask that you all do your best. Taoist Master Han and the others sat in front of the jade table as before. Taoist Master Han raised his hand and cupped his hands towards the three of them. All right, we will listen to Taoist Master Han's instructions. Yi Mingzi was the first to answer. Taoist Master Di Quan and Fairy Xiang Feng did not speak. They only nodded slightly. Seeing this, Taoist Master Han raised his hand and took out a fist-sized bead from his Taoist robe. Thunder-devouring bead. Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and was secretly shocked. The thunder-devouring bead in Taoist Master Han's hand was very similar to the thunder-devouring bead that Xiao Hua had brought back to the thunder-controlling sect from the Dawn Rain continent. However, the thunder-devouring bead in Taoist Master Han's hand was clearly a bit shabby. Although there were some threads of lightning inside, they could not cause the lightning to change. In particular, the outer layer of the thunder-devouring bead actually had traces of golden lines, and on top of these lines, there were many strange lightning runes that were as thin as ants. These lightning runes floated along with the light, and their shape was also like a horned dragon. Damn it, what is the background of this Taoist Master Han? He actually has a thunder-devouring bead in his hand? However, it seems like this thunder-devouring bead is not his life magic treasure. I don't think it's that important. Xiao Hua sighed and immediately understood what Taoist Master Han was thinking. Fellow Taoists, please prepare. Taoist Master Han raised the thunder-devouring bead, swept his gaze across the crowd and said in a low voice. At this time, Xiao Hua suddenly opened his mouth and said, Taoist Master Han, I have a suggestion. Taoist Master Xiao, please speak. Taoist Master Han was slightly startled as he said in surprise. Xiao Hua laughed. Taoist Master Han, how confident are you? 30%. Taoist Master Han replied without hesitation. So it's like that. Seeing that Taoist Master Han did not hide anything, Xiao Hua nodded and said, Since Taoist Master Han is only 30% confident, and after 20 hours, we are 100% confident. In order to save time, I have a suggestion. If Taoist Master Han feels that he is about to fail this time, can you remind me, or if I feel that Taoist Master Han has reached a critical moment where he is about to fail, I can help. I only need 40%. Chapter 3741. This? Zhenren Han really didn't expect Xiao Hua to have such a suggestion. Even Master Sun Kong and Zhang Daoran were somewhat stunned. Zhenren Zhao's words. Can you speak for the other fellow Taoists? Zhenren Han thought for a moment and whispered to Zhenren Di Quan and the others. While they were discussing, Xiaohua also transmitted his voice to Zhang Daoran and the others, telling them about his sudden decision. Zhang Daoran and the others had already obtained spirit pills, and they were all half a step into the out-of-body realm. That life source magic treasure was very important. It was a communication channel between the main body and the nascent soul. They couldn't give up their life source magic treasure, even for a spirit weapon. In particular, there was only one spirit weapon on the jade table. It was not easy to take it out, so they all agreed with Xiaohua's suggestion. Hearing that Zhang Daoran and the others didn't object, Zhenren Han naturally didn't have any objections. If Xiaohua made a move, they would have a 60% chance of success. If Xiaohua didn't make a move, they would only have a 30% chance of success. In fact, at this time, Zhenren Han and the others didn't understand that this was Xiaohua's earliest suggestion. After the discussion, Taoist Master Di Quan and the others released their yuanying. Taoist Han rubbed his hands. What fell from his hands was not light, but thunder threads. The thunder threads turned into a lightning net and landed on the thunder-devouring bead. The entire thunder-devouring bead rumbled. Thunderbolts were produced from the thunder-devouring bead. The entire thunder-devouring bead was like a small horned dragon that pounced on the restriction. Boom, boom, boom. The scene that everyone was familiar with appeared once again. The lightning above the restriction also surged towards the thunder amplification tree. Different types of lightning collided with each other, and one by one, they were annihilated in the void. Seeing the lightning above the restriction weakening, Zhenren Han shouted, "Fellow Taoists, please make a move." As soon as his voice fell, Zhenren Di Quan and the others urged their life source magic treasure to attack the restriction. However, to Xiaohua's surprise, Fairy Xiangfeng's magic treasure was changed to a bell. There were 2 bells, and as he waved them, 2 beams of light, one green and one red, intertwined and rushed into the restriction. Crackle, crackle. The 4 magical treasures hit the seal, especially Fairy Xiangfeng's green and red brilliance. Although it couldn't be compared to Xiaohua's spirit-punishing vital light, it was still very sharp. The entire seal shook violently and let out extremely powerful thunderclaps. Boom! Amidst the thunderclap, 30% of the lightning thread sent the magic treasures of the 4 nascent soul cultivators flying, and the remaining 70% of the lightning threads landed on the thunder-devouring bead. The thunder-devouring bead shone brightly, and there was a faint sound of a dragon's roar. Following that, there was a crisp pa-pa-pa sound, and the surface of the originally worn-out thunder-devouring bead actually began to crack. After half of the 7 layers of lightning threads were absorbed by the thunder-devouring bead, the cracks on the thunder-devouring bead grew even larger, and the other half of the lightning threads bared their fangs and brandished their claws as they pounced towards the magic treasures of Taoist Han and the others. Not good. Perfected Han controlled the thunder-devouring bead and immediately sensed that something was wrong. He hurriedly shouted, "My magic treasure can't hold on any longer." Fellow Taoists, be careful. As he spoke, Perfected Han was the first to withdraw and fly back dozens of feet. Taoist Master Di Quan and the others had long since suffered from the restriction, and they were like birds startled by the twang of a bow as they hastily retreated. "Xiao is going to make a move." Seeing this, Xiaohua reminded them, and a golden light flew out from his Taoist robe. Shua! Almost faster than the lightning, the Tang Jiao cut through the loosened restriction below the thunder-devouring bead. At the same time, the restriction was torn open, and there was a loud rumble. The Tang Jiao shears were also hit by layers of lightning and tumbled in the air. What's going on? Gong Shu Isin stared intently at the spirit weapon inside the restriction. But after the golden light flashed, the spirit weapon suddenly disappeared. She exclaimed in disbelief and looked up at Xiaohua. She really didn't understand how Xiaohua had taken the spirit weapon away from the restriction that was only a sliver torn. Looking at Xiaohua again, his figure slightly swayed in the air, and his face suddenly turned pale. Granny! Song Longzi's restriction is really powerful. Xiaohua used his mind to take the item, and in just a moment, he was still injured by the lightning. Xiaohua understood his own difficulties and bitterly smiled in his heart. As soon as the spirit tool fell into Xiaohua's space, the restriction on the jade table immediately disappeared, and the lightning completely disappeared. When Xiaohua put away the Tang Jiao shears, only the damaged thunder-devouring bead was left floating in the air. Alas, I lost a treasure, but It's still like drawing water with a bamboo basket. Taoist Master Han sighed and waved his hand, and the thunder-devouring bead was about to fly up. At this moment, Xiaohua waved his big sleeve and cut off Taoist Master Han's magic power. Smiling, he took out the spirit tool and said with a smile, "Taoist Master Han, I'll make a deal with you." Taoist Master Han saw Xiaohua stop him from collecting the thunder-devouring bead and was slightly surprised. Looking at the thunder-devouring bead and then at the spirit tool, he suddenly realized, "Taoist Master Xiao, you've taken a fancy to my thunder-devouring bead?" "That's right," Xiaohua said with a smile. "I've taken a fancy to your complete thunder-devouring bead. Unfortunately, the thunder-devouring bead is damaged and can't match up to 40% of the spirit tool's value. I'm in a bit of a difficult position." Taoist Master Han didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xiaohua's words were clearly bargaining. If Xiaohua was in a difficult position, why did he stop him from collecting the thunder-devouring bead? He was clearly afraid that he wouldn't agree to the deal. It was obvious that he was trying to blackmail him. However, looking at Xiaohua's smiling face, Taoist Master Han felt a little distressed. Xiaohua's attitude could be considered amiable. If he was in a different situation, with such a great disparity in strength, what he did would be far more excessive than Xiaohua. Thinking for a moment, Taoist Master Han waved his hand and removed the magic power controlling the thunder-devouring bead. He said with a smile, "This thunder-devouring bead was obtained by me through life and death. It's very important to me. Although it's already damaged, I'm not willing to give it up." Everyone in the cave mansion was well aware that this sentence was also a bargaining. However, Xiaohua didn't mind. After all, the thunder-devouring bead was in his hands and the spirit tool was also in his hands. Although he first controlled the thunder-devouring bead to reveal his true thoughts, this was both passive and active. It was better than forcing the thunder-devouring bead into Taoist Master Han's hands. Forget it. Since Taoist Master Han also values the thunder-devouring bead so much, this thunder-devouring bead should be worth 40% of the spirit tool's value. Xiaohua took a step back and said with a smile, "I'll use 40% of the spirit tool to exchange for this thunder-devouring bead." Straightforward. Taoist Master Han was as surprised as everyone else. They couldn't think of why this damaged thunder-devouring bead was so important to Xiaohua. Xiaohua would rather give up the spirit tool to obtain this thunder-devouring bead. However, Taoist Master Han was also a decisive person. After thinking for a moment, he nodded in agreement. Xiaohua laughed mischievously. With a wave of his sleeve, the thunder-devouring bead fell into the space. Once again, the space was filled with lightning and strange phenomena. Xiaohua once again raised his hand, and the flute-like spirit artifact flew towards Taoist Master Han. He said, "I will give 40% to Taoist Master Han. Taoist Master Han now has 55% of this psychic treasure. Hee, I'll take 60%. Taoist Master Han was in a good mood. He smiled and prepared to accept the spirit tool. However, right at this moment, the spirit artifact let out a sharp sound that pierced straight into everyone's ears. The spirit artifact suddenly shook and actually escaped from Taoist Han's hands. It drew an arc in the air and rushed into one of the holes. "Still want to escape?" Xiaohua's Naiwan Palace flashed with golden light and blocked the spirit tool's attack. Then, he sneered and used the heaven and earth sleeve technique to control the spirit tool in an instant. Then, he took out a talisman from his Taoist robe and stuck it on the spirit tool under the urging of his magic power. The spirit tool's undulations immediately disappeared, and it obediently lay in Xiaohua's hand. "Fellow Taoist Han, keep it well." Xiaohua smiled and threw the spirit tool into Taoist Master Han's hand. Taoist Master Han's face was a bit red. He couldn't keep his face. Xiaohua didn't care about the spirit tool, but someone did. Old Senior Xiao. Seeing the spirit tool's power, Gongshu Exian hurriedly said, "Old Senior Xiao, this is a Taoist spirit tool. How can you easily give it to others?" But after Gongshu Exian finished speaking, no one echoed her. Gongshu Exian looked around and saw Gusu Chodi and the others looking at her like she was an idiot. In an instant, the greed that had just arisen subsided and her face flushed red. Wasn't she a Confucian cultivator? What did she want this spirit tool for? Even Master Sun Kong didn't say anything. How could she open her mouth? Besides, she didn't say anything earlier. Now that she saw the spirit tool's power, what was the point of bringing it up again? Taoist Master Han put away the spirit tool and brought Taoist Master Di Quan and the others to a corner to set up a restriction. After a while, the four flew back with smiles on their faces. Obviously, they each gained something. As for whose hands the spirit tool fell into, Xiaohua didn't care and didn't ask. Zhang Daoran looked at the cave abode that looked like it had been washed by water, and then looked at the four different cave entrances. He smiled and said, "The matter here is over, and we have no other way out. It seems that we can only break through the last maze. Fellow Taoists, what do you plan to do?" Master Sun Kong glanced at Taoist Master Han and the others and asked indifferently, "Fellow Taoist Han and the others also want to attack the formation with us?" Taoist Master Han said with a smile, "I also don't want to follow behind you, but there's no other way." Although Master Sun Kong didn't care about the spirit tool, he didn't want it to fall into the hands of others. This was what ordinary cultivators thought, so he asked Taoist Master Han. Zhang Daoren shook his head and looked at the four holes. He said, "For more passages, just like before. According to our experience in the previous maze, the most dangerous part of this maze is the protection outside. This maze seems to be where Senior Tsong Longzi tests our strength. Therefore, I think it's better to split up. What do you think, Taoist Master Xiao?" "Of course," Xiaohua said with a smile. "If we stay together, we'll have fewer opportunities. I agree to split up. In that case, I'll take this passage." Seeing that Xiaohua didn't object, Zhang Daoren raised his hand and pointed at a jellyfish-like hole. "I want to travel with Brother Daoran. What do you think?" Just as Zhang Daoran finished speaking, Taoist Master Han hurriedly spoke and cupped his hands towards Zhang Daoran. Chapter 3742. Zhang Daoren looked at Taoist Han, then looked at the strange faces of Taoist Di Quan and the others. He nodded slightly and said, "Of course. I'll lead the way. Brother Daoran will bring up the rear." Taoist Han saw that Zhang Daoran agreed and flew into the cave without saying a word. "Ha ha ha, why is Taoist Han more anxious than this old man?" Zhang Daoran laughed and waved his hand. "Disciples, hurry up and enter the cave." "Yes." Zhang Daoran and the other disciples agreed in unison and flew into the cave with the few low-level disciples. Just as Zhang Daoran was about to fly into the cave, Xiaohua seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He suddenly flew in front of the jade table and waved his sleeve. The jade table was taken into his space. Then Xiaohua let out a long breath. He clapped his hands and looked around. He smiled and said, "Phew! I finally remembered. I always felt that something was missing. It turns out that I didn't take this jade table away." Faint. Zhang Daoren looked at Xiaohua's stingy appearance and almost laughed out loud. He said loudly, "Brother Xiao, let's meet again in the cave." "Okay, I'll wait for Brother Daoran inside," Xiaohua replied with a smile. As soon as these words came out, Zhang Daoren's figure in midair dropped slightly by half a foot. This was simply more powerful than any spell. Since Taoist Han mentioned that he would follow Zhang Daoran, Taoist Di Quan and Yi Mingzi didn't stand on ceremony. They followed Zhai Xingzi and Sun Kong Shangren into the cave. Taoist Di Quan and Yi Mingzi wanted to walk together, but seeing Sun Kong Shangren's vigilance, the two consciously separated. "Taoist Xiao." Fairy Xiang Feng saw that everyone had left and asked with a smile, "Can I follow Taoist into the last maze?" "Of course." Xiaohua looked at the last remaining somewhat fat cave. The strange beast's shape was like a turtle and also like a big bear. He nodded slightly. Dao Cheng had already said that he knew Taoist Di Quan, but Dao Cheng had already left in advance. At this time, Fairy Xiang Feng was alone. Like Taoist Han, she cupped her hands at Xiaohua and said, "Since that's the case, I will also lead the way." With that, Fairy Xiang Feng flew into the cave. Xiaohua turned his head and shouted, "Fuji Wen." However, just as he finished speaking, Xiaohua was somewhat stunned. He hurriedly turned his head to look at the pitch-black cave entrance. He sniffed and said very strangely, "Strange, why is there a fragrance on Yun Mengzi's body?" "Senior." Upon hearing Xiaohua's call, Fuji Wen and Xue Ping flew over. Fuji Wen asked, "Shall we go in as well?" Fu Jiwen, do you think this? Forget it, let's not talk about this for now. Xiaohua wanted to say something but hesitated. He looked at Xue Ping and the rest and asked, "There's no one else here. Let me ask you, are you following behind me? Or enter this old man's nation weapon? Junior is willing to enter the nation treasure." A cultivator with serious injuries spoke up. Xue Ping and the others hesitated for a moment before entering as well. Without another word, Xiaohua put them into the Kunlun ruins and flew into the cave with Fu Jiwen. After waiting for Xiaohua and the others to enter the cave, a few moments later, cloud patterns once again appeared on the stone wall where Xiaohua and the others had appeared. The Confucian cultivator who was at the 5th level of origin energy from before flew out with a flushed face. As soon as the Confucian cultivator with thick eyebrows appeared, clouds surged around him again. However, when he saw the unusually clean cave abode and the 4 open tunnels, he immediately understood what had happened. This old man has truly underestimated these Dao sect cultivators. I even underestimated Song Longzi. My trip to the Cloud Mountain Maze today was worth it. After saying that, the Confucian cultivator hurriedly stood there. The flying inscriptions carried an awe-inspiring aura and formed a cauldron-shaped cocoon around him. The inscriptions that had condensed into crystal threads did not dissipate for a long time. However, it was only a moment before the Confucian cultivator opened his eyes reluctantly. He looked at the pitch-black tunnel and sighed. Sigh, what a pity. I still have to catch up. Otherwise, if Xiaohua leaves the cave abode, it'll be a little troublesome. After saying that, the Confucian cultivator pondered for a moment and flew into a tunnel. An hour after the Confucian cultivator disappeared, 3 Confucian cultivators wearing bright yellow robes also appeared. The 3 of them were even more decisive than the Confucian cultivator with the thick eyebrows. They didn't stop at all. The 3 of them didn't separate and rushed into a passage. The second layer of the maze was different from the previous ones. The cave was obviously much larger, and there was light coming from an unknown source. In particular, the restriction on divine sense was much stronger. Even someone as strong as Xiaohua could only extend his divine sense to a range of a few dozen meters, unable to extend it any further. At this time, Xiaohua had already caught up with Fairy Xiangfeng. Fairy Xiangfeng's so-called scouting ahead was just a polite attitude. If Xiaohua did not bring Fu Jiwen, he could let Fairy Xiangfeng fly in front. However, with Fu Jiwen, Xiaohua could only let Fu Jiwen take the heart-stabilizing plate and lead the way. Of course, Fairy Xiangfeng did not dare to not do anything. In this second layer of the maze, she had already blocked many attacks for Fu Jiwen and had even used her life source magic weapon several times. All right, Taoist Yun Meng. Seeing Fairy Xiangfeng working so hard, Xiaohua felt a bit embarrassed and said with a smile, "You rest for a moment. Next, Fu Jiwen and I will lead the way. Then I will have to trouble Taoist Xiao." Fairy Xiangfeng was truly exhausted. Her cheekbones flashed with a strange light. Xiaohua waved his hand and took out a pill from the space. He handed it to Fairy Xiangfeng and said with a smile, "This is a pill refined by Xiaohua. It can replenish quintessential essence. Why don't you try it?" Fairy Xiangfeng smiled and took the pill. However, she did not consume it and replied, "I am just a bit exhausted. I will be fine after resting for a while." Xiaohua's expression did not change. He slapped his hand and the seal of overturning sea flew above Fu Jiwen's head to protect him. "Taoist Xiao." Fairy Xiangfeng looked around and asked curiously, "Where are Xue Ping and the others? Did they stay in the cave?" "No." Xiaohua replied without turning his head. "Xiaohua has a country weapon. I will temporarily keep them inside and let them out after we get the cave." Fairy Xiangfeng was slightly surprised. She rolled her eyes and said, "Taoist Xiao is very protective of your disciples." "Xue Ping and the others are not Xiaohua's disciples." Xiaohua corrected, "Xiaohua only met him once." "Since you only met him once?" Fairy Xiangfeng asked in confusion. "Taoist Xiao believes Xue Ping's words? You dare to bring him into the Misty Mountain Maze?" "Yes." Xiaohua nodded. "Aren't we in the Misty Mountain Maze now? His words are not wrong." "That is not what I meant." Fairy Xiangfeng hurriedly explained. "What I mean is that Taoist Xiao is already able to bring them in. Moreover, In the cave from before, I saw that these low-level disciples had already found some useful treasures. In particular, when they passed through the stone wall, they obtained a lot. Taoist Xiao does not need to bring these burdens. Taoist Xiao means to leave them in the cave from before? That is not it. Sigh, I don't know what to say. Fairy Xiangfeng was at a loss for words. She was purely trying to dispel Xiao Hua's conflict and increase his favorable impression of her. I just feel that Taoist Xiao is doing too much for these strangers. Perhaps. Xiao Hua activated the seal of overturning ocean, and a ferocious earthen yellow radiance rushed past Fu Jiwen, sweeping away all the huge rocks that were smashing towards him. He replied somewhat absent-mindedly, "They are still my Dao sect's disciples after all. I also want to give them some benefits." Taoist Xiao is so kind. Fairy Xiangfeng sneered in her heart. However, her tone did not change. She then asked, "Oh right. I was invited by Taoist Di Quan. However, I heard from Dao Cheng that Taoist Xiao had just returned from the Yaotai gathering. Could it be that Taoist Xiao did not kill my Dao sect disciples on the Yaotai mountain?" Of course I have killed Dao sect disciples. However, I have killed more Confucian sect disciples. Xiao Hua did not seem to notice. He still had his back facing Fairy Xiangfeng as he said, "Moreover, I have killed many Dao sect disciples. However, I have saved many more." "I don't believe it." Fairy Xiangfeng laughed. "That year, I participated in the Yaotai gathering and killed many people. There were many Dao sect disciples inside. It is up to you whether you believe it or not." Xiao Hua turned around. His eyes were very clear. "I have no regrets." "Humph. No regrets." Fairy Xiangfeng cursed inwardly. After passing through the maze, she did not see Fairy Su Ming and did not hear Zhai Xingzi and the others mention her. How could Fairy Xiangfeng not know that Fairy Su Ming had died in Xiao Hua's hands? I heard that this Yaotai gathering was different from before. Not only did golden core cultivators die inside, even nascent soul cultivators were almost wiped out? Fairy Xiangfeng asked again. Xiao Hua nodded. "Indeed." "Why? How would I know?" Xiao Hua shook his head. "I was also seriously injured inside. I was lucky to escape and do not know the details." Of course, if Taoist Yunmeng wants to know who I have killed, I can tell you the reason. "Don't." Fairy Xiangfeng hurriedly waved her hand. "Taoist Xiao, you are preparing to kill me. I don't want to hear this." "It doesn't matter." Xiao Hua laughed. "If I don't mention names, how would you know? I have endured for a long time. If I don't tell anyone, I will feel uncomfortable." "Very well." Fairy Xiangfeng laughed bitterly. "I can only believe in Taoist Zhao's character." Then, Xiao Hua explained in detail why he killed Taoist Xiang Tian and Taoist Chu Feng. Fairy Xiangfeng's expression changed several times. In the end she sighed slightly and said, "Taoist Xiao, you killed them well. One of them bullied the weak and forced people to buy and sell. In the end, he even harmed the innocent. The other one was even more sinister. He wanted to take advantage of your injuries to steal your Chenkuan bag. He indeed deserved to be killed." Chapter 3743. If fellow Taoist Elma thinks so, then that's great. Xiao Hua said with a smile. "I've always convinced people with virtue. Now that you and I are going to break through the maze of Misty Mountain, we should trust each other." Taoist Xiao, don't worry. Fairy Xiangfeng nodded. "I have absolute trust in Taoist Xiao." "Oh right." Xiao Hua suddenly asked, "Does fellow Taoist Elmar know Fairy Su Ming?" "Of course." Fairy Xiangfeng blinked her eyes and said curiously, "Ji Prefecture's Fairy Su Ming is a late nascent soul stage cultivator, how could I not know?" At this point, Fairy Xiangfeng rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "Could it be that Taoist Xiao has something to say directly to Fairy Su Ming? Or, does Taoist Xiao have other ideas? Oh, according to what I know, although Fairy Su Ming has never dual cultivated, she still has dual cultivated Taoist Xiao." Without waiting for Fairy Xiangfeng to finish speaking, Xiao Hua hurriedly waved his hand to stop her. He rolled his eyes at her and said, "No matter how useless I am, I won't find such an arrogant female cultivator as my dual cultivation partner." "I'm just joking with Taoist Xiao." Why is Taoist Xiao looking for Fairy Su Ming? Fairy Xiangfeng asked. Nothing much. Xiao Hua's face sank. In the future, whether it's Ji Prefecture or hidden Immortal continent, there won't be a cultivator called Fairy Su Ming. Why? Fairy Xiangfeng was surprised, but suddenly she seemed to have thought of something. She hurriedly stopped in midair and asked in a low voice, "What does Taoist Xiao mean? I've only met Fairy Su Ming once. I don't care about the grudges between you and Fairy Su Ming. Why is Taoist Xiao talking to me about this?" Hee. Taoist Elmar doesn't need to worry. Xiao Hua said with a smile. I just want to tell Taoist Xiao that the cultivator who forced her to buy and sell was Taoist Chu Feng. Fairy Su Ming wanted to take revenge for Taoist Chu Feng and wanted to besiege me with other cultivators in the first maze, but I killed her. Sigh. Fairy Xiangfeng took a deep breath and sighed. Damn Fairy Xu Ming. That Taoist Master Chu used her name to commit a lot of evil deeds, but these evil deeds were nothing more than gossip in Fairy Su Ming's ears. Now that she was dead, it was her retribution. In fact, there is really no need for Taoist Master Xiao to mention this to me. Xiao Hua stared at Fairy Xiangfeng and asked word by word. Oh, this Xiao wants to know if fellow Taoists saw Fairy Su Ming when you entered the Misty Mountain Maze formation. Fairy Xiangfeng didn't avoid his gaze. Instead, she calmly replied, This old man can swear a blood oath that this old man didn't see Fairy Su Ming and the others outside the Misty Mountain Maze. Hearing Fairy Xiangfeng's words, Xiao Hua's expression relaxed. He smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Elmar, there's no need to be so serious. I was just asking. It was also at this time that a rumbling sound came from afar. It was as if the entire secret passage had collapsed. An earth-shattering cloud of dust mixed with gravel rushed toward Xiao Hua and the others. Seeing this, Fairy Xiangfeng hurriedly waved her hand. A jade bracelet-like magic treasure flew out. At the same time she shouted, Taoist Master Xiao, be careful. This old man just happens to have a bracelet that repels dust. Okay. Xiao Hua didn't have time to care about whether Fairy Xiangfeng had sworn a blood oath or not. He agreed and stepped aside, watching the jade bracelet fly in front of his head. The jade bracelet emitted an earthy yellow brilliance. That brilliance was like a long cover. Not only did it cover Fu Jiwen and himself, it also produced a strange fluctuation in front of his head. It separated the dust and gravel that were rushing over to both sides. However, the strength of the gravel in the secret passage was extremely great. The brilliance of the jade bracelet trembled rapidly like a candle in the wind. Taoist Master Xiao. Fairy Xiangfeng softly reprimanded and called out, This is the restriction of the secret passage. It seems to be quite powerful. We must work harder to break through. The longer we stay in this restriction, the more dangerous it will be. This old man will lead the way. I'll have to trouble you, fellow Taoist. Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Xiangfeng's vigorous figure flying in front of him. A thoughtful expression appeared on his face. Sure enough, the restrictive spells in the second layer of the formation were far stronger than those in the first layer. Fairy Xiangfeng would not care about the dust and pebbles that were pouring into the tunnel like a flood if she were anywhere else. However, as she kept moving forward, she found it harder and harder to keep going. This was because not only did she have to find the direction in this secret passage, she also had to maintain the magic power of her magic treasure. Especially as she went deeper into the secret passage, Fairy Xiangfeng found that her magic power was getting more and more exhausted. Moreover, the Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi in the secret passage was getting thinner and thinner. The magic power consumed by Yuanying was much more than usual. Taoist Master Xiao. After flying like this for an hour, there was still no end in sight. Fairy Xiangfeng could only open her mouth and say, This secret passage is strange. This old man's magic power is actually not enough. This old man reckons that I can still hold on for the time of a meal. After that, I will let Taoist Master Xiao lead the way. This Xiao has already sensed it. Xiao Hua's face also became serious. He said, This maze is actually starting to restrict my Taoist magic power. At the same time, it is also gradually isolating the Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi. I fear that there will be big trouble ahead. Humph. Fairy Xiangfeng snorted coldly. She took out a pill from her bosom and put it into her mouth. She said very heroically, This old man wants to see how powerful this maze is. As she spoke, Fairy Xiangfeng once again activated her magic power. The jade bracelet shone brightly. Like a bamboo umbrella swaying in a storm, it rushed into the distance. Fu Jiwen. Xiaohua looked into the distance and ordered, "You can hide in here." "Yes, master." Fu Jiwen hurriedly kept the heart-calming plate. Xiaohua took out the Kunlun mirror and kept Fu Jiwen. Then Xiaohua pointed at the seal of the ocean and shouted, "Daoist Yun Meng, this Xiao will help you." Wang Wang. The coiling dragon roared. The seal rumbled. An earthen yellow light that was much more vast than the jade bracelet shot out from the seal of the ocean and chased after it like a flood dragon. "Thank you, Daoist Xiao." Fairy Xiangfeng looked at the power of Xiaohua's seal of the ocean and her heart sank. However, there was no change in her expression. She only smiled and nodded. She retreated slightly and made space for Xiaohua. Just like that, they flew for another 2 hours. Seeing that the secret tunnel was even wider and the qi of heaven and earth was almost gone, Xiaohua and Fairy Xiangfeng's true essence was suppressed by the restriction in the secret tunnel and could not flow. Their nascent souls were also tightly locked in their lower dantian and could not be released even if they wanted to. Fairy Xiangfeng was still fine as she was only a nascent soul. However, Xiaohua had more than 100 nascent souls in his lower dantian. That terrifying pressure almost made him collapse. Helpless, Xiaohua could only take out the Kunlun mirror and keep all the nascent souls in the Kunlun ruins. Phew! With the nascent souls gone, the pressure suddenly decreased. Xiaohua let out a long sigh of relief. At this moment, Fairy Xiangfeng suddenly shouted in surprise, "Daoist Xiao, quickly release your divine sense. Divine sense is restricted here." Xiaohua hurriedly released his divine sense. As expected, the restriction on his divine sense was long gone. His divine sense was very free in the secret tunnel. What is going on? Xiaohua frowned slightly. However, he felt a lot more at ease. Since his divine sense could be controlled and his divine sense could be used, he had one more method to protect himself. Whoosh! At this moment, there was a sound like the sound of water. Xiaohua and Fairy Xiangfeng both felt their Dharma treasures break through a layer of barrier. Their bodies also became lighter. The surrounding dust and rocks and the heavy pressure disappeared. When they looked around again, it was just a misty space. Xiaohua and Fairy Xiangfeng looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with shock. The two of them did not dare to put away their Dharma treasures and released their divine sense to check. It was not a big deal, but the two of them had a strange expression on their faces. Because their divine sense could not scan the edge of the space at all. "Daoist Xiao, can you still use your Dharma power?" Fairy Xiangfeng saw Xiaohua's expression and knew that things were not good. "No." Xiaohua shook his head. However, he looked down and said, "Although we cannot use flying techniques or Dharma power, we are still standing in the air." Then he looked up at the seal of overturning ocean that rushed out earlier. There was no light, no Dharma power fluctuation. It was just floating in the air as if it was placed on a table. Xiaohua walked a few steps and even jumped a few times. He reached out his hand and took the seal of overturning ocean. He weighed it in his hand and said, "Our Dharma treasures cannot be used either." Ouch! Saying this, Xiaohua's expression changed greatly. "What is it?" "Daoist Xiao." Fairy Xiangfeng also picked up the jade bracelet from the air and asked hurriedly. "Qianquan bag cannot be used." Xiaohua smiled bitterly. "This." Fairy Xiangfeng tried a little. As expected, the jade bracelet could not be put into the Qianquan bag. Her expression changed greatly. Woo! At this moment, a gust of wind came from an unknown place. It was very cold and desolate. Fairy Xiangfeng could not help but shrink her neck. However, just as she moved, she froze in place. She hurriedly looked at Xiaohua. Fortunately, Xiaohua did not notice Fairy Xiangfeng's movement. Instead, he looked into the distance. After a moment, Xiaohua waved his hand and said, "Daoist Yun Meng, follow me." Saying this, he did not wait for Fairy Xiangfeng to speak and walked towards the right. "Daoist." Fairy Xiangfeng opened her mouth. She did not know where Xiaohua's confidence came from. After all, in this place, there was only light. Spiritual sense could not see the edge of this place. Even a Yuanying cultivator was no different from an ordinary blind person. However, Fairy Xiangfeng tactfully followed behind Xiao Hua. However, when she saw Xiao Hua's defenseless junior, her eyes flashed with a strange expression. Xiao Hua did not walk in a straight line. Most of the time, he would even walk backwards. In particular, every time he changed directions, Xiao Hua did not stop at all. It was as if he could see the path under his feet clearly. Xiao! Taoist Xiao! Fairy Xiangfeng could not help but say, You can see the space restriction. Chapter 3744. No! Xiao Hua replied without the slightest hesitation. When Fairy Xiangfeng heard this, she almost jumped up. She even said in a low voice, Since you can't see, why are you bringing me around here? Xiao Hua shrugged and replied humorously, Since Taoist friend doesn't know where to go, why don't you follow me? Just treat it as digestion. Digestion? Fairy Xiangfeng almost fell down again. This was the Misty Mountain Maze, a maze set up by a tribulation-passing cultivator. Their lives could be in danger at any time. How could he be so casual? At this moment, Fairy Xiangfeng really wanted to slap Xiao Hua's face. After walking for a while, Fairy Xiangfeng's heart began to move. Unlike the arrogant Fairy Su Ming, she didn't have the intention to let Xiao Hua go. Although Xiao Hua said so much, she didn't believe him completely. Xiao Hua's character didn't have much light in her eyes. What she wanted to do was to kill Xiao Hua and calmly escape. Now that they were in this mysterious space, even if she did not have any means to attack Xiao Hua, as long as she could escape from this space and kill Xiao Hua, wouldn't she achieve her goal? While thinking, Fairy Xiangfeng looked at Xiao Hua's back and looked left and right. Then, she turned around and started to walk away. Wang Wang. Just as Fairy Xiangfeng walked a few feet forward, the seemingly ordinary light in front of her immediately disappeared. Following a series of rumbling noises, leaves and pine needles flew toward her like a storm. Oh! Fairy Xiangfeng scanned with her divine sense and immediately found the difference between the leaves and pine needles. She knew that the leaves contained a strong force. She snorted and did not hesitate to raise her hand to cast a spell. Just as she raised her hand, Fairy Xiangfeng's expression changed drastically. How could she still use her dermic powers at this moment? These seemingly ordinary flying leaves and pine needles were now sharp weapons for murder. He could instantly kill her right here and now. Oh no! Fairy Xiangfeng quickly retreated, but she had miscalculated. Not only could she not cast any spells, but her movements were also somewhat slow. How could she block the continuous flying leaves? Fairy Xiangfeng knew that things were not good. She could only hope that her armor could block so many attacks. CSI. The flying leaves and pine needles seemed to have the power to tear the void apart. Fairy Xiangfeng's face turned even paler when she heard this. In the blink of an eye, Fairy Xiangfeng's spiritual sense transformed into a hand. She did not care whether it was effective or not, and grabbed at the air like a Yuanying hand. Woo! Out of Fairy Xiangfeng's expectation, a nascent soul hand similar to the one she usually used appeared and grabbed all the flying leaves and pine needles in the hand, sweeping away all the miscellaneous items in the space. I see. Fairy Xiangfeng immediately came to a realization. She understood why she could only use her spiritual will in this space. This space is where Senior Tsonglang Zi tested the juniors of the Dao sect. What's important is the finer control of one's divine sense. Just as Fairy Xiangfeng came to a realization, ka-cha-cha! 1,000 feet above her head, streaks of lightning appeared. Then, layers of dark clouds rolled and formed all sorts of indescribable shapes. Numerous fist-sized hailstones formed in the dark clouds and came crashing down. Good timing! Fairy Xiangfeng was filled with a heroic spirit. She performed a spell with both hands. Even though she did not use any arcane energy, it was no different from using arcane energy. One after another, cherry blossom-like lights appeared above Fairy Xiangfeng's head, protecting her firmly. PFFF PFFF PFFF. Unfortunately, Fairy Xiangfeng had underestimated the power of the hailstones. The hailstones immediately destroyed the cherry blossoms that had just bloomed. Moreover, the second and third layer of hailstones did not stop falling. It seemed like they had no intention of stopping. Not good. Seeing the power of the hailstones, Fairy Xiangfeng's pride was crushed in her heart. She hurriedly released her spiritual will to form more cherry blossoms. Of course, the cherry blossoms were destroyed by the hailstones again. Fairy Xiangfeng was indeed a late-stage Yuanying cultivator. She was extremely proficient in controlling her spiritual will and coordinating her spells. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, she had already formed close to 100 layers of cherry blossoms. These 100 layers of cherry blossoms blocked the 100 layers of hailstones, protecting her from being injured by the hailstones. Whoa! When there was a gap, Fairy Xiangfeng immediately activated her Yuanying hand. The Yuanying hand grew to the size of a few mu and grabbed towards the sky. In an instant, the entire layer of clouds was torn apart. Fairy Xiangfeng took this opportunity to retreat. However, the moment the layer of clouds was torn apart, the hailstones fell onto the Yuanying hand. The huge force caused the Yuanying hand to collapse. Fairy Xiangfeng had no choice but to continue using her spells to form more cherry blossoms to block the hailstones. Then, she slowly retreated. This repeated for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Fairy Xiangfeng was starting to feel tired. Not only were there too many hailstones, but the force of the hailstones was also too strong. Fairy Xiangfeng's spirit sense was greatly depleted, and she could vaguely feel a tearing sensation coming from her Naiwan palace. Fairy Xiangfeng raised her head and looked at the cherry blossoms that were swept away by the hailstones. The cherry blossoms should have been tens of feet away from Fairy Xiangfeng, but now, they were only tens of feet away from Fairy Xiangfeng's head. Fairy Xiangfeng's heart was filled with bitterness. She did not expect that the spiritual will that she had cultivated for 1,000 years could only last for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. Looking at the endless hailstones and the distance she had retreated had already exceeded the distance she had advanced. She still could not see Xiaohua. Fairy Xiangfeng laughed bitterly. Just a moment ago, she was still scheming against Xiaohua. However, she did not expect that she was the stupidest one. Oh, Taoist Yunmeng, so you are here. At this time, Xiaohua's shocked voice sounded in front of Fairy Xiangfeng. Just now, this Xiao turned around and could not find you. I did not expect you to fall into a restriction. Taoist Xiao, quickly use your Yuanying hand. Fairy Xiangfeng heard Xiaohua's voice and called out without hesitation. However, just as she said that, she was filled with regret. Yes, this was a dead end. Although she could not escape, why couldn't she drag Xiaohua down with her? Could it be that she was inferior to Fairy Su Ming? Yuanying hand? How can I use it without magic power? Xiaohua was also shocked. However, looking at the cherry blossoms above Fairy Xiangfeng's head, Xiaohua fell into deep thought. He then looked at the hailstones rushing towards him and quickly slapped his forehead. Boom! His spiritual will rushed out and a Yuanying hand of several mu in size appeared, tearing apart the hailstones and black clouds above him and Fairy Xiangfeng. Ha ha ha, so that's how it is. Xiaohua was naturally not as foolish as Fairy Xiangfeng. When he saw this, he naturally understood that Fairy Xiangfeng felt extremely bitter in her heart. Taoist Yunmeng, follow this Xiao. Xiaohua's Yuanying hand was much more solid than Fairy Xiangfeng's. That layer of hailstones was unable to destroy it. Xiaohua had enough time to find the exit. AI, many thanks, Taoist Xiao. Fairy Xiangfeng was somewhat helpless. She clearly did not want to obtain any benefits, but in a life-and-death situation, she had no choice but to follow Xiaohua. Looking at how Xiaohua Dong quickly walked out of the dark clouds, Fairy Xiangfeng squinted her eyes and looked at the previously calm light screen. She bowed and said, I thank Taoist Xiao for your help. It's fine, it's fine. Xiaohua casually waved his hand and said, follow this Xiao. Don't be careless. This place is really dangerous. Yes. Fairy Xiangfeng slightly gritted her teeth. It was unknown whether the hatred in her heart had increased or decreased. Xiaohua was still leisurely strolling around. However, there was no danger in this stroll. Not to mention hailstones, there were not even pine needles or flying leaves. However, the space was still boundless. It seemed that even if he walked for 10,000 years, it would still be the same. Why is there wind? Fairy Xiangfeng's heart was not as clear as Xiaohua's. Only now did she notice that the sound of wind when they first entered the space had increased. It made her feel a real chill. Taoist Xiao. Fairy Xiangfeng could not help but say, "This wind is somewhat strange." Xiao Hua rolled his eyes and said helplessly, "Please, fellow Taoist, there is no need for you to say anything. This Xiao has been blown around for a long time. How could I not know? Then, is there any other way out?" Fairy Xiangfeng gritted her teeth so hard that they were about to shatter. However, she still held back her anger and asked. Xiao Hua shrugged and shook his head. "This Xiao does not know. However, this Xiao feels that, as long as there is wind blowing past, there must be an exit. Perhaps the exit of this space is right in front." "Are you really stupid or are you pretending to be stupid?" Fairy Xiangfeng said angrily. "You are talking about an ordinary cave. This is a maze set up by Senior Tsong Lang Zi. How could there be?" "Woo!" Before Fairy Xiangfeng could finish, a strange gust of wind blew her words back into her throat. Fairy Xiangfeng was caught off guard. Her body tilted slightly. She did not dare to be careless and quickly released her spiritual sense. A several chi large cover covered her. Whoosh whoosh. A few terrifying sounds could be heard coming from the cover. Fairy Xiangfeng could see that the cover formed by her divine sense was being torn apart by the strange wind. "See." Fairy Xiangfeng sucked in a breath of cold air and said in shock, "If this wind landed on my body, if I did not have a magic treasure to protect me, wouldn't my body be cut into pieces?" Thinking of this, Fairy Xiangfeng hurriedly looked at Xiao Hua. "See." Fairy Xiangfeng screamed again as if she had a toothache. Xiao Hua, who was not far from Fairy Xiangfeng, was shaking, but he didn't use his divine sense to protect himself. Instead, he simply stretched out his hands and stood there as if he was hugging the wind. The strange wind that could cut through the divine sense barrier blew on Xiao Hua's body. His Taoist robe was torn apart like a butterfly, but Xiao Hua didn't seem to have heard it. It was as if his body wasn't afraid of it at all. Chapter 3745. Shameless. Fairy Xiangfeng couldn't help but spit out in shock. This was because the Taoist robe on Xiao Hua's body had already begun to shatter, and his arm was already exposed. Inside, there was dark golden skin. Unfortunately, Fairy Xiangfeng was now Yun Mengzi. Even if she didn't want to look, she couldn't avoid it. She could only use her divine sense to form a barrier and follow behind Xiao Hua with difficulty. Fairy Xiangfeng felt like an ordinary person trudging through a violent gale. As she ventured deeper into the storm, an indescribable feeling of suffocation arose from her Naiwan palace. It was as if the wind had turned into mud, covering her mouth and nose. Her chest heaved rapidly. She wanted to gasp for air, but she couldn't breathe in a single breath of fresh air. Wang wang wang. Just as Fairy Xiangfeng was about to call out to Xiao Hua, the entire space started to shake. The strange wind that was squeezing her to the point of bursting suddenly disappeared. "Not good!" Xiao Hua yelled from afar. "Taoist Yun Mengzi, quickly come over." Fairy Xiangfeng also felt a sense of danger. She hurriedly rushed over to where Xiao Hua was. However, before she could reach Xiao Hua's back, she saw a funnel-like object gradually forming in midair in the originally misty space in the distance. The strange wind that had stopped earlier started to grow stronger again. However, this time, the strange wind had a rotational force. "Wind! Hurricane!" Fairy Xiangfeng blurted out. "It's like the tsunamis and hurricanes of the East Sea." She looked at the wobbling funnel in the distance that looked like a baby that couldn't walk yet. "That's right." Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes. He looked at the hurricane that was slowly moving over and said calmly, "This hurricane is the true test of space. The hurricane is moving towards where we need to go. We can't avoid it. Only by using a divine sensibility to escape from the hurricane can we pass Senior Tsong Longzi's test. This is almost impossible." Fairy Xiangfeng smiled bitterly. "This old man's spirit energy is already at the upper stage of the 4th grade. Although my spirit energy hasn't undergone any special refinement, before the test, my spirit energy is already somewhat exhausted. My Naiwan palace is abnormally painful. Even a spirit-severing stage cultivator would find it difficult to pass such a trial, let alone a leaving aperture stage cultivator. To nascent soul cultivators like us, this cloudy mountain bewildering formation is a dead end." Perhaps we should have tried to find a way out of the cave just now. Fellow Taoist, do you regret it? Xiaohua asked indifferently as he faced the gale that had already begun to blow. Of course not. Fairy Xiangfeng narrowed her eyes. She knew that her answer was completely irrelevant to Xiaohua's question. That's great. How could Xiaohua know what Fairy Xiangfeng was thinking? He nodded and said, since you don't regret, then protect yourself first. Let me see if I can bring you out of this hurricane. You? And bring me along? Fairy Xiangfeng was in disbelief. It's a pity that this Zhao's nation armament can't be used. Xiaohua said somewhat regretfully. Otherwise, this Xiao would have collected you first, and things would have been much easier. Perhaps. Fairy Xiangfeng declined to comment. How could she be willing to fall into Xiaohua's hands? While they were speaking, the gale had already closed in. The surrounding space had already formed a huge whirlpool under the enormous hurricane force. Xiaohua looked at this huge funnel hurricane. It was very similar to the huge whirlpool under Yaotai Mountain. However, this funnel's might was far inferior to that whirlpool. Okay, now is the time. Seeing that Xiaohua was about to be blown away by the hurricane, Xiaohua roared and shouted, Fellow Taoist El Dreamy, quickly stretch out your arm. Oh, okay. Fairy Xiangfeng's barrier was already on the verge of shattering. Hearing Xiaohua's roar, she was slightly startled and immediately stretched out her arm. Let's go. Xiaohua grabbed Fairy Xiangfeng's arm. His body flew up gracefully and started to spin in the direction of the hurricane. How is this possible? Fairy Xiangfeng saw that Xiaohua was flying extremely steadily as though he was using a flying technique. She naturally did not dare to believe it. However, when she scanned with her spiritual will, she immediately understood. Xiaohua actually used his spiritual will to form 2 wings on his back. Now, with a flap of the wings, he actually flew up. While Fairy Xiangfeng was dumbfounded, Xiaohua's little tail had already started to curl up. When he felt the strange wind, he was already thinking about how to escape. When he was fighting with Kong Hongwu at the foot of Yaotai Mountain, Kong Hongwu's sacred art of transforming his Aoran Qi into wings immediately appeared in his mind. Kong Hongwu had already refined his spirit to the void and could form wings. Although Xiaohua's cultivation did not have such a divine ability, his spiritual will was far superior to Kong Hongwu's. Now, he actually succeeded. Of course, to form wings with his spiritual will to fly, he still had to resist the hurricane. Xiaohua's spiritual will was greatly exhausted. However, Xiaohua had plenty of experience fighting against the hurricane. Thus, he was not in any danger. God. After a long time, this thought appeared in Fairy Xiangfeng's mind. To be able to form wings with his spiritual will, especially without the use of any spells, meant that his control over his spiritual will was extremely precise. It was something that she could not even imagine. Moreover, she knew very well that if one did not have an ancient secret technique, it would be impossible to cultivate this divine ability successfully. At least from what Fairy Xiangfeng had seen, there was no second person like this in the entire hidden immortal continent. Xiangtian, of all people, why did you have to offend him? Fairy Xiangfeng felt a sense of helplessness. If what Xiaohua said is true, why did you? Thinking of this, Fairy Xiangfeng did not know what to think or how to complain. Rumble. Fairy Xiangfeng's entire body shook. Even Xiaohua's body was somewhat unbalanced. Xiaohua's spiritual will wings were somewhat messy. In an instant, the 2 of them were like 2 balls of paper dancing in the wind. Rumble. Fairy Xiangfeng's entire body shook. Even Xiaohua's body was somewhat unbalanced. Xiaohua's spiritual will wings were somewhat messy. In an instant, the 2 of them were like 2 balls of paper dancing in the wind. Xiaohua very naturally loosened his grip and was about to cast a spell. At this moment, Fairy Xiangfeng's figure floated to Xiaohua's back along with the wind. Xiaohua's dark golden neck was only a few feet away from Fairy Xiangfeng's head. Fairy Xiangfeng's eyes opened wide. Her eyes flashed and her hand on her chest involuntarily moved to her waist. However, when she felt the sharp protrusion on her waist, a rare trace of hesitation appeared in Fairy Xiangfeng's heart. However, this hesitation disappeared in a flash. Fairy Xiangfeng moved her finger and was about to take out the sharp protrusion. At this moment, Xiaohua suddenly shouted. Damn it! This old man forgot that spiritual power cannot be used. Watch this old man. As he spoke, Xiao Hua's spirit sense changed in the air again. A flying boat that looked like a flying leaf appeared below Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiangfeng. Xiao Hua stepped on it and waved his hand. Taoist El Dreamy, come on up quickly. This Xiao understands. Fairy Xiangfeng saw that the opportunity to assassinate Xiao Hua had disappeared and felt rather regretful. She had no choice but to step on the flying boat. She smiled and said, "What did Taoist Xiao understand? This is Senior Tsong Lang Zi testing our spiritual will. Not only is it testing the thickness of our spiritual will, it is also testing the control of our spiritual will. In this space, all spiritual power is empty. There is only spiritual will. Spiritual will is spiritual power." Xiao Hua was somewhat excited. He looked at the flying boat and shouted, "Spiritual will can even replace magic treasures." Fairy Xiangfeng looked at the excited Xiao Hua with disdain. She already knew this when she first fell into the trap. However, she still agreed. Taoist Xiao is truly powerful. Even now, this old man still does not understand how a Yuanying's hand is used. Furthermore, look at Taoist Xiao's wings and this flying boat. It is truly amazing. This is nothing. Xiao Hua smiled and shook his head. Just as he was about to speak, rumble! There was another huge tremor. The flying boat instantly disintegrated into nothingness. Xiao Hua seemed to be prepared for this. He reached out and grabbed Fairy Xiangfeng again. His divine intent condensed again. This time, Fairy Xiangfeng was even more dumbfounded. Under his divine intent, a pair of 100-meter-long wings appeared on Xiao Hua's back. When the wings spread, it gave off the feeling of a great rock soaring 90,000 miles with the wind. I must have seen wrongly. Fairy Xiangfeng did not dare to believe her spiritual will. This pair of wings was extremely realistic. Not only were the huge wings flapping in the whirlwind, but the feathers on the wings were also trembling. It was as though real feathers were fluttering in the air. With the wings formed by his spiritual will, Xiao Hua was like a bird in the sky, free and unrestrained in the whirlwind. During this period, the wings formed by his spiritual will were shattered hundreds of times. However, every time they were shattered, the wings would immediately reappear. Xiao Hua's body did not even sway. Fairy Xiangfeng's spiritual will was constantly staring at Xiao Hua's back. Seeing how miraculous Xiao Hua's spiritual will was, her heart turned cold. She had activated her divine sense to protect her own body. No one knew better than her about the hurricane and the force behind it that Xiao Hua was currently facing. No one understood better than her how difficult it was to condense a pair of wings with one's divine sense in this hurricane. Not only that, at the very beginning, when she was struggling with Xiao Hua in the whirlwind, Xiao Hua's body was constantly swaying. His entire body was also trembling. However, after half a meal, she discovered that Xiao Hua's body was gradually stabilizing. His entire body seemed to be one with the wings on his back. He was like a real bird circling in the whirlwind. The whirlwind was naturally not an ordinary one. Not only did it have a terrifying wind force, there were also small whirlpools within the whirlwind. These whirlpools also had a tearing force. The barrier formed by Fairy Xiangfeng's spiritual will was shattered by these whirlpools. However, since Fairy Xiangfeng could protect herself, there was no need to mention Xiao Hua. Chapter 3746. Xiao Hua didn't know how big this hurricane was. After flying for several hours, he finally saw the edge of the hurricane. Only then did the oppressive force begin to slowly lessen. Haha, if that's the case, then we don't need to fly anymore. Xiao Hua did his best to rush out of the hurricane and shouted with a loud laugh. But just as he shouted, Xiao Hua's body suddenly fell, and his face became deathly pale. After Xiao Hua stabilized his body, a pair of wings that were only a few feet long grew out and slowly brought Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiangfeng down. Xiao Hua bitterly smiled and said, "Taoist El Dreamy, this Xiao's spirit sense has been greatly exhausted. It seems that we can only walk step by step." "No worries." Fairy Xiangfeng's eyes flashed and smiled. "I'm already very satisfied to be able to escape with Taoist Yunmeng's blessing. What's wrong with walking a few more steps?" "Okay, we'll walk slowly," Xiao Hua said as he released his hand. Fairy Xiangfeng also transformed into a simple flying boat and descended from the sky. After Fairy Xiangfeng landed, she immediately placed her hand on her waist and bit her lip. At this moment, other than spiritual will, there were no other sacred arts that could be used. Xiao Hua's struggle in the hurricane had already exhausted his spiritual will. Fairy Xiangfeng didn't think that Xiao Hua would have a stronger spiritual will than her when her own Naiwan palace was in extreme pain. See, not good. Before Fairy Xiangfeng could take out the item, Xiao Hua looked into the distance with a puzzled expression. What's wrong? Taoist Xiao? Fairy Xiangfeng moved her hand away from her waist and looked into the distance and released her spirit sense again. However, the area dozens of miles in front of him was still empty, and there was nothing suspicious about it. Listen, Xiao Hua was very mysterious. He put his index finger on his mouth and whispered. Fairy Xiangfeng frowned and listened attentively. Sure enough, in just a few moments, her expression changed drastically. That was because there was a slight vibration coming from the wind. It was slow and rhythmic. Even though the vibration was slight, it covered a huge area. Fairy Xiangfeng's expression changed not only because of the vibration but also because of Xiao Hua's sharp senses. If not for Xiao Hua's warning, Fairy Xiangfeng wouldn't have noticed it. This must be another test. Fairy Xiangfeng's mouth was bitter as she looked at Xiao Hua and asked in a low voice. Xiao Hua looked around and nodded. Yes, and it came from the path we had to pass. I'm afraid we can't avoid it. If Fairy Xiangfeng suggested. We can avoid the trap first. With Taoist Zhao's ability, the trap won't be able to hurt us. Then we can avoid the test. At this point, Fairy Xiangfeng didn't even want to continue. She knew that there was no need to test it. The trap before the hurricane and after the hurricane were definitely different. Since it was a test, even if they hid in the trap, they might not be able to avoid the test. Let's go. Xiao Hua waved his hand. Let's see what the test. All right. Fairy Xiangfeng had no choice but to agree. I will need your help in the next test. At the same time, Fairy Xiangfeng felt a sense of guilt. That's right. Why did I come to the Misty Mountain Maze formation? Taoist Xiao Hua to avenge Taoist Xiangtian. But, before she could do anything, Xiao Hua had helped her time and time again. Treasures, opportunities, and now, her life was saved by him several times. She even had to ask him to take care of her here. How could she do anything? Kill. Thinking of this, Fairy Xiangfeng wiped away her good intentions. There are no good men in this world. Xiao Hua is just trying to buy people's hearts. Roar! After walking for half a cup of tea's time, a huge brown bear charged over from afar. This brown bear was more than 10 zhang tall and its fur was standing on end. The brown bear was running on all fours. Occasionally, it would stand up and roar towards the sky. Its arms were waving crazily in the air. I understand. Seeing the brown bear, Fairy Xiangfeng immediately thought of the shape of the tunnel. How could she not know that this brown bear was the final test of the maze? But since it was the final test, the danger was self-evident. If it's just one or two then it's fine. Xiao Hua was very calm. He squinted his eyes at the approaching brown bear and said, if it's a group, then it will be troublesome. That's right. A light flashed in front of Fairy Xiangfeng. A spear appeared and floated in the air. I can't just hide. I'll help Taoist Xiao. Okay. Xiao Hua nodded and continued to walk towards the brown bear. Fairy Xiangfeng reached out and grabbed the spear. A cold feeling came from the spear. Fairy Xiangfeng waved the spear and a gust of wind came. It was no different from a real spear. Fairy Xiangfeng looked again. She really did not understand how this space was set up. Could it be? Tribulation-passing cultivators are really omnipotent in this cultivation world? Fairy Xiangfeng was a little excited. But soon, the excitement turned into a sigh. Pity. I won't be able to see my tribulation-passing realm in this life. Thump, thump, thump. As the brown bear ran, the ground beneath Fairy Xiangfeng's feet began to tremble. The bear, which was hundreds of feet long, now looked extremely ferocious. An unpleasant stench assaulted her nostrils. Fairy Xiangfeng could even clearly see the blood-red eyes of the brown bear. Without waiting for Xiao Hua to act, Fairy Xiangfeng roared. Kill! As if she wanted to vent the hatred in her heart, the spear in Fairy Xiangfeng's hand flew straight towards the chest of the brown bear. Roar! The spear was like lightning, and the brown bear went crazy. The bear's paw slapped on the spear, but the strength of the spear was enough. The bear's paw bounced back as if it had been electrocuted. Pooh! The moment the bear's paw bounced back, the spear pierced the brown bear's chest. However, the long spear pierced through the bear's chest, and it flew straight for 100 meters before slowly disappearing. The brown bear still rushed forward for a few meters, then it fell to the ground and disappeared in a moment while howling. Good. Xiaohua gave a thumbs up. Daoist Yunmeng is really good. Thank you, thank you. Fairy Xiangfeng said modestly. Another spear appeared in her hand. However, this time, Fairy Xiangfeng's gaze fell on Xiaohua's throat. Dong dong dong. The ground shook again. Even more stench came from afar, and even more screams came from afar. Kill, kill, kill. Fairy Xiangfeng moved her gaze away from Xiaohua and looked into the distance. That group of brown bears had turned into Xiao Hus. When these brown bears were close enough, Fairy Xiangfeng roared and waved her arms. Spears flew out of her hands and killed the brown bears one after another. They fell down and disappeared. Seeing Fairy Xiangfeng so fierce, Xiaohua was surprised. However, he didn't have time to think about Fairy Xiangfeng's transformation. He released his divine sense and looked at the seemingly endless brown bears. These brown bears were not like the hurricane from before. They were extremely lethal. Moreover, seeing Fairy Xiangfeng's spear attack, some of the brown bears were already able to block it. Needless to say, the brown bears behind were even more powerful. Presumably, the spear would not be able to kill them easily. What should he and Fairy Xiangfeng do when they encounter such a brown bear? Could it be Senior Tsong Longzi really wants to kill the Dao sect juniors who enter the maze? Xiaohua was confused. If that's the case, why did the previous maze have a cultivation technique? But if he only wants to test the cultivation of the cultivators who enter the maze, why does he have to kill them like this? Even with Yun Mingzi's late-stage Yuanian cultivation, he can't handle it. I understand now. Thinking of this, Xiaohua suddenly came to a realization. Song Longzi was an ancient cultivator who went through the tribulation. Let's not talk about his own cultivation, just the cultivation of the other Daoist seniors should be around the 7th or 8th stage. As for the 2 layers of formations that Senior Tsong Longzi set up outside the maze, it would be difficult to break through without a 7th or 8th grade essence force. Therefore, the maze within the cave is naturally targeted at the 8th grade essence force. Even though the maze has been worn down for millions of years and its power is very weak, the maze within the cave is much weaker than the maze outside. Therefore its power is much greater. Damn it, it seems like I have harmed everyone. If it weren't for Xiaohua, Zhang Daoran and the others wouldn't even be able to break through the outer formation. How could they enter the maze? If they couldn't enter the maze, they wouldn't lose their lives. Seeing how Fairy Xiangfeng was facing such a difficult situation, Xiaohua could already imagine the danger Sun Kong and the others were facing. If they lost their lives, it would be Xiaohua's fault. Xiaohua couldn't help but recall what Fairy Jing had said to him in front of Heartbreak Mountain, as well as her advice to him. Yes, an ancient maze. It's not something we can easily enter with the Dao sect in its declining state. Xiaohua sighed and condensed his spiritual will into a hammer. Boom! The hammer fell and several brown bears were reduced to nothingness as they howled in grief. Ah! Fairy Xiangfeng was caught unprepared. She cried out in surprise and the spear in her hand stopped moving. Looking at the hammer that destroyed several brown bears, she fell into a daze. She knew in her heart that although her spear was powerful, the spear itself was made of spiritual will. Every time she used it, she would consume some of it. Her already sore Naiwan palace was now in a tearing pain. She simply could not hold on for too long. But looking at Xiaohua, his spiritual will was like a hammer. How much spiritual will did he consume? Could it be that Xiaohua didn't consume much spiritual will in the hurricane? Chapter 3747. Daoist Master Xiao. Fairy Xiangfeng suddenly felt a sense of relief. She laughed and said, "Since we can't retreat, why don't we just charge forward?" We can kill as many brown bears as we can. This old man is satisfied to be able to die together with Taoist Master Xiao. Good. As you wish. Xiao Hua was also filled with lofty sentiments. He loudly responded and pounced towards the brown bears. As Xiao Hua's figure moved, boom, boom, boom. Huge rumbling sounds came from midair. The entire space shook. Huge rocks fell from the sky like falling stars, smashing towards the thousands of brown bears. Fairy Xiangfeng was stunned for a moment. She smiled bitterly and also charged forward. The long spear in her hand stabbed out. Fairy Xiangfeng had already made her decision. Perhaps only if she died under the paws of the brown bears would she not hesitate to kill Xiao Hua. Perhaps if she and Xiao Hua both died here, she would be able to take revenge for Taoist Master Xiangtian. As the two of them charged into the group of brown bears, an apocalyptic scene appeared. Huge rocks fell from the sky and smashed into the ground. Along with the deafening sound, the brown bears disappeared one by one. Although there was no smoke or dust, within a radius of a few li, there were cries and cries everywhere. Fairy Xiangfeng first tried her best to use her spiritual sense to kill the brown bears. However, after an unknown period of time, her spiritual sense had already dried up. Not to mention the long spear, she could not even condense a blade of grass. At the same time, Fairy Xiangfeng did not know how long she had been running with Xiao Hua. A fatigue that she had not felt in 1,000 years appeared in her body. When she looked at Xiao Hua again, she saw that he was no longer as vigorous as before. The falling rocks in the sky had also become sparse. However, the brown bears in front of Xiao Hua and Fairy Xiangfeng were still endless. They could not kill them all. Xiangtian. This concubine will follow you. You will not be lonely in the underworld. Fairy Xiangfeng muttered in her heart. Her body also slowed down. Damn it! Seeing Fairy Xiangfeng land, Xiao Hua also stopped. He shouted, Taoist Yunmeng, hold on for a while longer. I'm afraid this old man cannot hold on any more. Fairy Xiangfeng smiled sadly. This old man. Although I was prepared and thought of the ending, this old man never thought of the process. Ending? Process? Xiao Hua was startled. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He looked at the brown bears that filled his vision, then turned back to look at the sky from before. He said confidently, Taoist Elmar, please wait a moment. I understand. Spiritual Master Xiao. Fairy Xiangfeng was slightly surprised. She raised her head and saw several huge rocks exploding in mid-air. Each of the huge rocks formed a huge whirlpool. These whirlpools quickly gathered at one spot and finally formed a whirlpool that was dozens of feet in size. This whirlpool spun rapidly and gradually expanded. As it expanded, the suction force increased as well. Oh! At first, the brown bears didn't care at all and pounced on Xiao Hua and the others. But before they could get close, the vortex sucked them in. When the suction force was enough, the brown bears flew up from the ground and landed in the vortex. Not only that, as the brown bears landed in the vortex expanded again and pounced on the ground. See? Fairy Xiangfeng saw this and immediately understood Xiao Hua's intention. This was an unimaginable idea. Since spiritual will could condense into anything, then the brown bears were naturally condensed by something similar to spiritual will. Xiao Hua used his spiritual will to condense into a vortex, and used his unimaginable spiritual will to push the vortex to suck the brown bears into the vortex. Then, not only could he kill the brown bears, after the brown bears were killed, their spiritual will would fuse into the vortex and increase the suction force of the vortex. This way, the vortex would be pushed one after another. Naturally, it was much more effective than the falling rocks and spears. Go! Xiao Hua shouted. His face was as pale as paper. However, the huge vortex had already escaped from Xiao Hua's control and slowly flew into the distance. As the vortex flew, more and more brown bears were sucked in. Boom! Xiao Hua's body fell to the ground. He groaned in extreme exhaustion and said, Taoist Elmar, this Zhao's Naiwan palace no longer has a trace of spiritual will. Let's rest for a while. Let's wait for this space to collapse. Rest is a must. Fairy Xiangfeng clenched her teeth. She stood up not far away and walked to Xiao Hua's side. She took out a few qi-long fang from her waist. This fang was blood red and almost transparent. At the tip of the fang, there was a trace of black. Furthermore, Taoist Xiao does not need to worry about resting anymore. Taoist Elmar? What is the meaning of this? Xiao Hua lay on the ground weakly. Seeing Fairy Xiangfeng walking over with her Feng, he asked curiously. Haha. Fairy Xiangfeng saw Xiao Hua's confusion and laughed. What meaning can this concubine have? This concubine is only here to take the life of another. You. Xiao Hua was shocked. He hurriedly tried to crawl up from the ground. Unfortunately, after struggling for a while, he could only barely sit up. He looked at Fairy Xiangfeng and said, You are not Elmar? Of course this concubine is not Elmar. Fairy Xiangfeng laughed sharply. This concubine is Fairy Xiangfeng. You personally killed that Reverend Xiang Tian's dual cultivation partner. How is this possible? Xiao Hua looked at Fairy Xiangfeng and said in shock, You are clearly a male cultivator. Before I reached the Yuanying stage, I was naturally a male cultivator. Fairy Xiangfeng smiled sinisterly, but after reaching the Yuanying stage, I became a female. I understand. Xiao Hua had already calmed down. He nodded and said, This Xiao has heard about your matter. At that time, this Xiao also sympathized with you. Sympathize? Is there any use in sympathizing? Fairy Xiangfeng's face showed loneliness. Sympathy can only be cheered by the weak. When I reached the late Yuanying stage, there was no sympathy in this world. Forget it. Since you want to take revenge for Reverend Xiang Tian, this Xiao also has nothing to say. However, this Xiao has already told you the ins and outs of the matter clearly. Xiao Hua sighed and said, Although you love Reverend Xiang Tian, your love is already a burden. It is this love that led Reverend Xiang Tian to his death. Perhaps this Xiao will let him off in this Jade Pavilion gathering. However, there will be a day when he will die from his arrogance. No matter what, whoever killed Xiang Tian, I will kill that person. Fairy Xiangfeng said coldly, I do not care who is right or wrong. Xiao Hua stared at Fairy Xiangfeng and asked, Even if it is your life savior? That's right. Fairy Xiangfeng replied without hesitation, Reverend Xiao has saved me many times. I have long remembered it in my heart. Previously, I also had many opportunities to kill Reverend Xiao Hua, but I was hesitating. Because this space is truly dangerous. No one can guarantee that they will be able to leave alive. If Reverend Xiang Tian and I were to die here, I naturally would not kill anyone. Unfortunately, Reverend Zhao's methods are heaven-defying. Such a difficult problem was easily solved by you. I have no choice but to take action. However, Reverend Xiao, please do not worry. I will not live alone. As long as Reverend Xiao dies in my hands, I will immediately commit suicide to repay Reverend Xiao for saving my life. Just based on the fang in your hand? Xiao Hua said coldly. Do you think that it can pierce through this Zhao's diamond body? Reverend Xiao, I am afraid that you do not know what I am holding in my hand? Fairy Xiangfeng said coldly. This is a venomous dragon fang. Not only is it incomparably sharp, it is also extremely poisonous. Even if you have cultivated some diamond body, you will not be able to block this fang. The venomous dragon fang might not be able to pierce you to death, but the poison is enough to kill you. See. Xiao Hua sucked in a breath of cold air. Fear appeared on his pale face. However, after a moment, Xiao Hua sighed. Forget it. This Xiao is indeed too kind. Although your background is somewhat strange, this Xiao did not look into it. This entire time, I have been taking care of you, protecting you to this place. Since you insist on taking this Xiao's life, this Xiao does not even have the strength to truss a chicken. I can only let you do as you wish. Come, as long as you do not let down your conscience, then do it. Conscience? Is there still a conscience in this world? Fairy Xiangfeng was somewhat agitated. When I was being bullied by those filthy people, where did their conscience go? Where are those people with a conscience? The suffering that I went through, who would know? Whenever this concubine is mentioned, who would think of the suffering that this concubine went through? They only think of filthy people. They only know how to say that my methods are ruthless. Even, there were cultivators who came to bully me after I formed my nascent soul. They keep saying that they look up to me. Where did their conscience go? Although Xianxia is somewhat arrogant, he always protects me and gives in to me in everything. He never mentions anything that makes me unhappy. In my eyes, he is the one with the most conscience. Just for this so-called conscience, you go against your conscience to kill this Xiao. Xiao Hua said coldly, "What is the difference between you and those people who humiliated you?" "There is no point in saying more, Taoist Xiao." Fairy Xiangfeng raised the venomous dragon Fong and said indifferently, "If not for the fact that you are my savior, I would definitely not say so much to you. I would definitely not let you know the truth." As she spoke, the venomous dragon Fong descended like lightning. However, before it even landed halfway, Fairy Xiangfeng's hands began to tremble. Her entire body began to tremble and tears began to flow from her eyes. Who knows how many years she had persevered, but at this moment, she finally collapsed. Fairy Xiangfeng raised her hand and shouted towards the sky, "Xiangtian, you are forcing this concubine. Although this concubine has always doted on you and this concubine has never allowed you to do anything outrageous, how much have you done behind this concubine's back? Do you think this concubine does not know? This concubine has always been lucky and felt that perhaps no one would dare to touch you. However, this concubine knows that if you continue to act like this, something will happen sooner or later. Xiangtian, it is not that this concubine does not want to take revenge for you. However, if this concubine kills Taoist Xiao, this concubine is no better than a pig or a dog. What is the difference between this concubine and those animals? Xiangtian, wait for this concubine will follow you." As she spoke, Fairy Xiangfeng raised the venomous dragon Fong and descended towards her snow-white neck. Chapter 3748. However, the moment the venomous dragon tooth was about to land, a powerful force grabbed Fairy Xiangfeng's hand. "Who?" Fairy Xiangfeng turned pale with fright and looked around. There is no one else in this space. Xiao Hua stood up with a smile on his face and said with a smile. Fairy Xiangfeng looked like she saw a ghost and said in shock, You. Don't ask me if I'm fine." Xiao Hua shrugged. "This Xiao is naturally fine." "How can you be fine? Even if it's a 7th grade spirit sense, it would be unavoidable for it to dry up here, right?" Fairy Xiangfeng was shocked. Then she exclaimed, "Could it be that you already knew that I am Fairy Xiangfeng?" Spirit sense, let's not talk about it. That's this Xiao's secret. I can't tell my enemies." Xiao Hua said with a smile. "But speaking of your reason, this Xiao was already vigilant and was basically certain." "How did you know? Since you were suspicious and even certain, why did you save me?" Fairy Xiangfeng was confused. Xiao Hua shrugged and said with a smile. "Firstly, when Fairy was breaking the seal in the cave, you didn't use your natal magic artifact at the start. Presumably, you were trying to hide something?" Fairy Xiangfeng clenched her teeth and didn't say anything. "You let Di Quan lead the way and hide yourself. You thought that nobody would know, but Di Quan's occasional questions were all directed at Fairy. Doesn't that mean you're the mastermind? Especially, when choosing the passage, Di Quan and the rest rushed to choose others. Obviously, they wanted to leave this Xiao last and be separated with you. Isn't that a flaw? Because they knew you wanted to kill this Xiao and they knew they weren't my match. Since you knew you weren't my match and still wanted to kill this Xiao, then if you're not Fairy Xiangfeng, who are you? Also, even though Fairy changed your appearance and your Yuanying is also a male, the fragrance on Fairy's body is still there. This can't help but make this Xiao suspicious." Fairy Xiangfeng bit her lips and retorted, "That's what you thought after the fact." Xiao Hua ignored Fairy Xiangfeng and said, "As for why I saved you, it's because you're different from Fairy Su Ming. Fairy Su Ming is extremely arrogant and wanted to perish together with me when she saw me. As for you, even though your temperament has changed greatly, this is all because of the evil others have done to you. So you chose to fight evil with evil. What's more, once you cultivate to the 4th grade of Essence Force, others will fear you. You won't be able to experience the kindness of others. This Xiao feels that if you can experience the good in this world, perhaps, the evil in your heart will decrease. Therefore, this Xiao cannot not save you. This Xiao hopes that there will be more good in this world." Fairy Xiangfeng's tears flowed down as if no one had ever said such words to her in her life. With evil in one's heart, no matter how high one's cultivation is, one's heart won't be calm, and one's foundation won't be firm. Only with kindness in one's heart can one have a clear path between heaven and earth. Xiaohua continued, "Back then, I met a fish called Little Cabbage." Xiaohua narrated the story of Little Cabbage, causing Fairy Xiangfeng's face to be filled with tears and grief. Finally, Xiaohua smiled and said, "And you did not disappoint this Xiao. There's a saying in Buddhism that one can become a Buddha by letting go of the butcher's knife. Fairy is that fearless Buddha, a Buddha that has cut off the evil in your heart, a Buddha that has cut off everything from your past. I believe that with today's kindness and resolution, as well as the comprehension in the maze array, Fairy's future will be immeasurable." This concubine understands. Fairy Xiangfeng stopped crying and said with a choked voice, "Many thanks, Taoist, for your explanation. Even though this concubine cannot let go of the hatred in my heart, this concubine will try to think of Taoist's kindness in the future and treat people with kindness." "Good, if Fairy understands, this Xiao will let you go." Xiaohua nodded. "But, if you let go of the venomous dragon tooth, this Xiao will take it away to prevent any more evil thoughts in your heart." This concubine understands. Fairy Xiangfeng let go of the venomous dragon tooth and Xiaohua also retracted his Buddha sense. As soon as Xiaohua retracted his Buddha sense, Fairy Xiangfeng immediately collapsed to the ground. Her state of mind changed so drastically in such a short period of time, it was really hard for her to accept. Without arcane energy, she was no different from an ordinary female cultivator. Kacha! At this time, a crisp cracking sound came from the distance, and cracks filled the sky in an instant. It was Xiaohua who had used the space to condense the vortex, and used the space's divine sense to break the space's restriction. Following the space's rupture, divine sense attacks that were 100 times more powerful than the soul stab swept across the sky, as if the space was struggling on its deathbed. Ah! How could Fairy Xiangfeng withstand these divine sense attacks? She screamed and fainted on the ground. On the other hand, layers of golden light appeared outside Xiaohua's Naiwen Palace as the innate divine restriction blocked the attacks. Wang! The moment the space cracked, Xiaohua sensed the heaven and earth yuan qi. He quickly slapped his hand and summoned the Kunlun mirror. While keeping Fairy Xiangfeng into the Kunlun ruins, he also kept the venomous dragon tooth into his spatial dimension. Sigh, poor Fairy Xiangfeng. Xiaohua kept the Kunlun mirror and sighed in his heart. Just as he said, if Fairy Xiangfeng was like Fairy Su Ming and attacked without any care, Xiaohua would not hold back either. However, with Fairy Xiangfeng's probing and Xiaohua's vigilance, Xiaohua gradually recalled the words about Fairy Xiangfeng's background. As the saying goes, a pitiful person must have a hateful side. At the same time, a hateful person would also have a pitiful side. Ordinary people with a compassionate heart would sigh at Fairy Xiangfeng's background, not to mention Xiaohua, a cultivator with a compassionate heart of a Buddhist sect. Along the way, Xiaohua was both on guard and enlightening her. Now it seemed that it was still very effective. Fairy Xiangfeng was able to rein in the horse at the last moment. It could not be said that she had thrown away her burden, but at least, she was not ruthlessly destroyed by Xiaohua. After this lesson, this poor person might have an epiphany. With the gains from the Misty Mountain Maze formation, her cultivation level will also improve. Her life will be exciting again. At this moment, the space within the maze formation collapsed and the surroundings were in chaos. The omnipresent waves were more powerful than a forest of blades and spears, wreaking havoc in the entire space. The target of these waves was the Naiwen Palace. If it were not for the innate divine restriction outside Xiaohua's Naiwen Palace, he would have been rolling on the ground in pain. If it were a serious injury, his Naiwen Palace would have been torn apart by the waves. This Xiao is really lucky. Xiaohua could sense that the innate divine restriction in his Naiwen Palace was flashing with golden light. Layers upon layers of divine miracles that seemed to be in a deep slumber began to awaken. One after another, ordinary or strange star charts appeared above his Naiwen Palace, revealing their majesty amidst the golden light. Xiaohua could not help but sigh. I wonder where this innate divine restriction came from. It has saved this Xiao's lifetime and time again. Hornwood dragon, fighting wood vermin, Kuei wood wolf. These are the real innate divine restrictions. How can those sinners of Star-Lord Palace represent them? That's right, Other than the rabbit in the capital sky star formation and the rooster in the plentiful sun devil devouring immortal formation, there were even more lightning dragons, tigers and leopards appearing in the golden light. The original names of these innate divine restrictions did not matter. No one knew if they existed or not. Since the Immortal Palace or the Tao sect gave these rather interesting names based on the appearance of these innate divine restrictions, they would be called these names. If the Immortal Palace could use them, so could the Tao sect. With the activation of the innate divine restriction, traces of obscure waves rushed into Xiaohua's space. They either landed on the green-robed Xiaohua's body or in the starry sky of the Tao of Heaven Xiaohua. Xiaohua understood that this was the comprehension of the innate divine restriction. If his 10 avatars could comprehend all of these divine restrictions, his cultivation would definitely improve beyond his wildest dreams. Thinking of this, Xiaohua's avatar rushed into the space. He ignored the green-robed Xiaohua and landed in the starry sky. He cupped his hands and said, "Tao friend Tao of Heaven Tao, I greet you." There was no sound or movement in the starry sky. However, Xiaohua knew that Tao of Heaven Tao had heard him. He continued, "I know that this innate divine restriction is very abstruse. Ordinary cultivators can't comprehend it. Even if it's the green-robed Tao friend, his main body wouldn't allow him to comprehend the abstruse of the divine restriction. Only Tao friend Tao of Heaven Tao, whose main body is the abstruse of the Tao of Heaven, is able to comprehend this innate divine restriction naturally. Furthermore, you won't suffer any backlash from the divine restriction. You will be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. Therefore, on behalf of the other Tao friends, I earnestly request Tao friend to comprehend these innate divine restrictions." The entire starry sky suddenly stopped. It was very strange. However, in just a moment, the waves coming from the Naiwan Palace seemed to be grabbed by a big hand and didn't go anywhere else. They were all thrown into the starry sky. It was like a stone thrown into the water. In an instant, the entire starry sky became alive again. At the same time, waves of comprehension rushed towards Xiaohua like a mountain flood and a tsunami. Xiaohua hurriedly cut off these comprehensions. He smiled bitterly and said, "Tao friend Tao of Heaven Tao, I'll leave these comprehensions with you first. When I have the time, I'll slowly absorb them. Although you and I have the same comprehension, this huge amount of comprehension is enough to make I explode." Following Xiaohua's voice, the huge amount of waves instantly disappeared and turned into a trickle. "Many thanks, Tao friend." Xiaohua cupped his hands and came out of the space. However, just as Xiaohua's consciousness came out, he immediately felt that something was wrong. This was because when Xiaohua entered the spiritual sense space, he was inside the passage of the Misty Mountain Maze formation. Although this passage was tall and spacious, it was still limited. If the spiritual sense space collapsed, the passage would inevitably be revealed. Now, the spiritual sense attack in the entire space had already disappeared. The feeling of light had already weakened. The passage from before still hadn't revealed itself. In particular, Xiaohua felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly released his Buddhist sense. Although his Buddhist sense couldn't be compared to his spiritual sense, it still couldn't find the end of the space. Chapter 3749. This is. Xiaohua, who had already grasped the Pearl of Wisdom, began to wonder. He couldn't imagine what kind of difficulties there would be after the test of the divine sense space. Boom, boom, boom. Just as Xiaohua released his Buddhist sense to explore his surroundings, suddenly, from the four corners of the space, 4 pillars of Aoran Qi soared into the sky and wrapped around Xiaohua. The 4 pillars of boundless Qi fell from the sky and condensed into 4 strange shapes. They looked like beasts, but also like something else. They couldn't be identified. Once these 4 boundless Qi forms were formed, a kind of aura that could suppress everything was emitted from them. It quickly filled the entire space. What was special was that these 4 similar auras were mixed together like water and milk. They surged and rushed towards Xiaohua. Not only that, when the auras sealed the space, thousands of inscriptions gushed out from the 4 Aoran Qi forms, condensing into sentences and articles one by one, and finally forming a book that covered the entire space. How can this be? Is it possible that they want to test the cultivation of a Confucian cultivator now? Xiaohua was completely puzzled, somewhat at a loss. Who? Suddenly, Xiaohua's eyes widened, and a fierce look flashed through his eyes. He switched his Buddhist sense to soul sense and looked below one of the Aoran Qi forms. Following Xiao Hua's stern shout, a Confucian cultivator wearing a brocade robe came out from the Aoran Qi pillars, but this Confucian cultivator was in a very sorry state. Not only was his hair abnormally messy, but his brocade robe was also torn to pieces. At this time, the Confucian cultivator was holding a square-shaped imperial tool in his hand. Clouds lingered inside, and wisps of Aoran Qi formed from the void and fell on it. As soon as the Confucian cultivator stepped into the air, he immediately looked at Xiao Hua in surprise. His thick eyebrows trembled slightly, and he asked curiously, "Huh? Your divine sense hasn't been exhausted yet? How did you find this old man?" Xiao Hua didn't answer the Confucian cultivator's question. He looked at the imperial tool in the Confucian cultivator's hand, then narrowed his eyes and looked at the Aoran Qi that had already merged together in the air. At this time, how could he not know that this was the Confucian cultivator's origin array? How could he not know that he had fallen into the Confucian cultivator's trap? However, he was very puzzled. Where did this Confucian cultivator come from? How did this Confucian cultivator follow him? How did this Confucian cultivator avoid the spiritual force storm in the spiritual force dimension? Moreover, how did this Confucian cultivator set up such an origin formation in such a short period of time? "Sir, as long as you tell me who you are and why you set up this defensive formation, I will tell you how I discovered you," Xiao Hua coldly replied. "Defensive array? Haha, you really are a half-baked Confucian cultivator." The Confucian cultivator laughed and said, "Our Confucian cultivator's array formation is called the origin array. How can it be called the imperial array? The so-called primordial array is also called defensive array is nothing but nonsense. This Zhao's lack of skill is my own problem. I don't need others to lecture me." Xiao Hua stared at the Confucian cultivator and asked, "I heard that Confucian cultivators are most particular about not changing their names. May I know what your name is?" "Hee, you are indeed sharp-tongued. It is no wonder that Duanmu Qing lost to you." The Confucian cultivator chuckled and said without hiding anything. Hearing this Confucian cultivator mention Duanmu Qing, Xiao Hua's eyes narrowed. He looked at the Confucian cultivator's thick eyebrows and said thoughtfully, "So you are from the Duanmu family?" "That's right. This old man is Duanmu Liangxing." The Confucian cultivator ignored Xiao Hua's gaze and calmly replied. Seeing this, Xiao Hua sighed and said, "Although this Xiao is very respectful to Confucian cultivator families, the Duanmu family has really disappointed this Xiao. The reason for this Xiao's enmity with Duanmu Qing is very simple. For this small matter, your Duanmu family first lent a scroll to help the state preceptor of the Bronze Pillar Nation. Now, you even sent your excellency to kill this Xiao from afar. Is this the action of a proper Confucian cultivator family? Moreover, this Xiao remembers that Duanmu Qing is only a scholar. In order to deal with this Xiao, the Duanmu family actually sent out a great grandmaster. Don't you think this is shameful?" Duanmu Liangxing smiled slightly and stretched out his hand to tidy up the scattered hair on his head. He said, "Fortunately, this old man came. If it was someone else, wouldn't it be like throwing a meat bun to a dog?" As he spoke, Duanmu Liangxing raised his eyes and looked to the left and said, "To be honest, this clan order should not have been accepted by this old man. However, this old man just happened to want to avoid trifling matters within the clan. Therefore, I took the initiative to go to Black Wind Ridge to find you." But what this old man did not expect was that Black Wind Ridge actually had another scenery. With this old man's cultivation, I could not easily enter the formation. This old man already had a premonition in his heart that you were going to give this old man a surprise. When this old man knew that you were going to Yaotai Mountain to participate in the Yaotai gathering, this old man purposely waited for you along the way. Although this old man did not manage to wait for you, this old man heard of Taoist Master Zhao's great name from the mouths of some nascent soul cultivators. At that time, this old man could not help but have a whole new level of respect for you. How could you be the little Confucian cultivator that Duanmu Qing spoke of who only had the strength of a second or third grade essence force? You could even assassinate the state teacher of the Bronze Pillar State and even participate in the Yaotai gathering. If you did not have the strength of a fourth grade essence force, this old man's name, Duanmu, would be erased from this old man's name. Moreover, looking at this spiritual sense space, damn it, even this old man's spiritual sense has been messed up. If this old man did not have imperial equipment passed down from my ancestors, this old man is afraid that before this old man could even see you, I would have been buried here, right? Since that is the case, how confident do you think you are? Xiaohua looked at this opponent whose strength was second only to Kong Hongwu and asked indifferently. 90%. Duanmu Liangxing said with great confidence. Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, You are very conceited. Of course. Duanmu Liangxing said with a smile. You only have the strength of a 4th grade essence force, while this old man has the strength of a 5th grade intermediate essence force. How can you be this old man's opponent? Moreover, if there is no accident, this spiritual sense base should have been broken by you, right? This old man does not think that. You still have much spiritual sense in your Naiwan palace. Lastly, since you are proficient in the array formation of the passageway, you must have seen that you and I are currently inside an essence formation. This essence formation was set up by this old man at the risk of exhausting my spiritual sense. With this essence formation, this old man can replenish the true qi and spiritual sense that I had previously exhausted. If this old man did not have a kind of warning sign, I would definitely say that I am 100% confident. You have calculated very well. Xiaohua clapped his hands and said, However, if you use this scheme to bully the weak, even this Xiao would feel ashamed. Duanmu Liangxing smiled faintly and waved his hand, saying, You are wrong. Today, this old man only needs to kill you here. Who would know that this old man came here? Who would know that my Duanmu family had once made a move against you? You have said so much. Could it be that you want to wait for this old man to show mercy? Could it be that you want to wait for other cultivators? No, this Xiao only wants to confirm whether or not you deserve to be killed. Xiaohua took a deep breath and said coldly as he looked at Duanmu Liangxing. Ha ha, Xiaohua, you are really too arrogant. Duanmu Liangxing laughed, and at this moment, Xiaohua's whole body suddenly produced a strange fluctuation. His whole body was like a breeze blowing, and in the blink of an eye, he had already arrived at Duanmu Liangxing's side. He raised his hand and took out the wishful steel staff. Boom! It smashed down with a bang. Puff, puff, puff. Just as the wishful steel staff fell, dozens of great spirit qi were born in mid-air. Although the wishful steel staff was like a hot knife through butter, when the wishful steel staff fell on Duanmu Liangxing's body, his figure had already turned into an afterimage, and Duanmu Liangxing's figure had already appeared in another place. Spirit refining. Xiaohua was slightly surprised. Duanmu Liangxing proudly said, Yes, this old man has already killed a spirit-refining great master, Xiaohua. You are not this old man's opponent, so obediently surrender. This old man will not take your life, and will only capture you back to the clan. As far as this old man knows, the clan may not punish you too severely. This Xiaohua has seen many sanctimonious hypocrites. If this Xiaohua falls into the hands of you Confucian cultivators, you will not say such things again. Xiaohua said coldly. He knew that the news of his great strength must have been reported to the Duanmu family by Duanmu Qing, and this Duanmu Liangxing must have been prepared. In this elemental formation, Duanmu Liangxing almost had the ability to teleport, and Xiaohua could not do anything with the wishful steel staff alone. Just as Xiaohua raised his hand and was about to take out the seal of overturning the sea or the Kunlun mirror, Xiaohua rolled his eyes and came up with a plan in his heart. He waved his hand and a golden light flashed out, striking towards Duanmu Liangxing's neck. At the same time, Xiaohua slapped his forehead with his hand. Rumble! Numerous pillars of righteous qi that were much thicker than the usual pillars of righteous qi came out from the origin formation. What was special was that there were 4 pillars of righteous qi that were as thick as a thumb that rushed out from the 4 monstrous righteous qi, and landed on Xiaohua's body along with the other righteous qi pillars. Wang wang! 2 deafening sword cries were produced from Xiaohua's body, and 2 green and red sword lights flew out, flying towards Duanmu Liangxing's chest. Ah! Xiaohua's soaring dragon shears was extremely fast. Once it was swung out, it immediately landed a few feet away from Duanmu Liangxing. Duanmu Liangxing cried out in alarm, and his figure disappeared. When he reappeared, his back was already drenched in cold sweat. He almost did not even have the chance to activate the elemental formation. Duanmu Liangxing was still afraid, and raised his hand. A green and bewitching light was produced from his fingers, An verdant flying sword flashed with a dazzling brilliance and appeared in mid-air. At the same time, the flying sword in Xiaohua's mouth had turned into a rainbow and once again rushed towards Duanmu Liangsheng's chest. True qi? Sword qi? Duanmu Liangsheng was stunned. How do you also have Confucian true qi? However, Duanmu Liangsheng was only stunned for a moment. He waved the long sword in his hand, and like a peacock spreading its tail, a fan-shaped sword light immediately appeared in mid-air. Each sword light was composed of tens of thousands of sword splendors, and each sword splendor had crazily rotating inscriptions. Xiao Hua's flying sword fell on this sword light, and with a loud boom boom, a series of qi waves rose up, and one by one, the inscriptions were torn apart. The entire sword light was broken by more than half, but the two flying swords' sword power was still blocked. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.